Good morning, everyone. Thank you for offering us a little bit of grace in getting started a bit late. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting for September 22nd. Happy autumn. And first, we'd like to go to the director's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to share two pieces of information. The first is surrounding healthy driving and distracted driving. So with the passage of House Bill 2597, significant changes to the distracted driving or cell phone law will be engaged October 1st. This bill makes it illegal to drive while operating a mobile electronic device. It has some exceptions, but holding a mobile device in one's hand and using that device is now a violation. Now recall the Distracted Driving Task Force that was convened by your Oregon Department of Transportation, our partners at Oregon State Police and AAA, identified as a major root cause the limitations associated with the current cell phone law, as it was creating difficulties for law enforcement to cite and the courts to adjudicate. House Bill 2597 increases penalties to a Class B violation for the first offense, Class A violation for the second offense, or the first offense if it contributes to a crash, and a Class B misdemeanor or a $2,000 fine for the third offense within a 10-year window here. Now concurrently, on September 1st, we launched here at the department a first-of-its-kind campaign aimed at eliminating distracted driving, and it is called Drive Healthy. And it challenges people to compete against each other in a healthy way to see who Oregon's safest driver is. Businesses, classrooms, community groups, families. Any kind of organization can sign up, download the Lifesaver app, and if you just go to your app store where you get your apps, just type in Lifesaver distracted driving and it'll pop up. Then work to put the phone down while you're driving. It's open to anyone. We think it's a great opportunity, maybe an opportunity for the commission. I just throw that out there. But our goal is, at a minimum, to raise awareness of how important it is to keep your hands on the wheels and your mind on the roads. As I've said many times, distracted driving is now endemic. It is an epidemic here in the state of Oregon, if not across the nation, and we need to do something about it. We also hope that this effort will reduce many lane departure crashes we've been seeing lately, where drivers go off the road or into oncoming lanes with very serious consequences. So, we have a new way of doing business. It's gamifying some things here. We challenge each other to be the best driver you can be. So in the morning, you can get to work, to school, to recreation in a safe manner. But at the end of the day, you can come home safe and healthy to your family and friends. So we hope all folks take advantage of this. We think the benefit will accrue to everyone here. The second issue I want to speak to is the challenges that we have been faced with regard to Mother Nature and fire. Now, I'll spend probably the most time on the I-84 Eagle Creek fire. But as you know, it's been an extremely tough season for the state of Oregon, if not for the West, to be honest with you. And while firefighters are on the front lines of fighting the fires, ODOT crews are on the front lines of support, ensuring those firefighters can get to the fires, providing traffic control, removing debris, whether that's rocks, soil, or trees from our highways and interstates. Madam Chair, what I'd like to do, and I've given you some pictures because the pictures are certainly worth 1,000 words here, but give you a quick walkthrough because there was a time, I believe, we had 26 fires burning just in the state of Oregon. But a quick walkthrough or tour of the fires that we have been engaged in, some have had significant impact to the transportation system. Let's start with the Chetco fire, or the Chetco Bar fire. And although it is the largest fire of almost 200,000 acres, there wasn't much direct impact to Highway 101 other than the heavy smoke that just infiltrated the communities down there. We moved to the North Umpqua, Crater Lake area, where there were a number of small fires that touched our system. The most significant impact was to Highway 138. It was closed for more than 3 weeks because of the debris on the highway that just continued to dump and fall onto the highway. And I think it was just this week that we opened that highway to two-way traffic. We moved to Central Oregon and the Sisters areas. This fire affected Highway 242, the McKenzie Highway. And given that, and just given Mother Nature as we move into the winter months, 242 will likely remain closed for the season. Santiam Junction area, again, a number of fires that touched our system. One fire occurred right along our highway on Labor Day, and it closed that highway and then required flagging for a time. Let's now move to the big one, the Eagle Creek fire, about 48,000 acres to date. It's my understanding, and if you can trust the good folks on the radio, I think they said it was 48% contained. Certainly Mother Nature, the rains have helped. But it certainly, this fire certainly had the greatest impact on our state highway system. The fire required us to close Interstate 84 on Labor Day. We did open the westbound lanes on September 14th, but the eastbound lanes remain closed. All the I-84 bridges, that infrastructure, have been inspected, roughly about 70 different pieces of infrastructure there. Unfortunately, there was no major fire damage to any of them. Now, crews are continuing to clean up the debris on the interstate as we attempt to fully open that piece of roadway. But this week, a significant problem was discovered in the Shell Rock Mountain area. Now, Shell Rock is, to give you, it's probably in between Cascade Locks and Hood River, right about in the middle, milepost 50-something, if my memory serves me correct. What we have is very steep slopes, and we have partially burned out trees on those slopes that have continued to come down. You have a picture of one of the trees that came down and actually took out a retaining wall and a catchment fit on that eastbound lane of the interstate. Both our contractors, we had specialists that we hired, were on the job, and we brought in experts from the Bonneville Power Administration who made the determination that it was just unsafe to go up there, where they could not put their people in that harm's way to take those trees down. So it left us with somewhat of a dilemma with those trees literally perched up on top of the old historic highway and then down onto the interstate as well. So our plan is to mitigate this, to install a sort of temporary catchment at the base of the slope to catch anything that may come down, be it a tree, be it a rock, boulder. When we do reopen the eastbound traffic, which will likely keep one lane closed adjacent to that slope for safety reasons, to create that safety buffer. As we look at the scenario that's playing itself out, if the best case goes well, then we believe that we may be able to open one lane to the eastbound interstate this weekend. Now, in addition to this, the Columbia River Gorge Multi-Youth Path that we were making investments on in partnership with Western Forest Lands, that has been compromised, as well as the historic Columbia River Highway. I will tell you that that jewel has sustained significant damage. We haven't, since our attention has been on the interstate, we really haven't fully assessed the extent of the damage and have not projected an opening date on that historic highway. But I've had the opportunity to go up and tour that highway, and I can't overstate how significant the damage is. And so, again, as I said, while the recent rains have certainly helped our firefighters gain ground on these fires, it's created another issue. This may be a gift that keeps on giving, to the extent that as the winter months come in, the rains fall, a slide-prone area that will only be exacerbated by Mother Nature here. So we know what's coming at us. We've had our geotechnical professionals up there identifying where we think the greatest exposure and risk is in terms of the burned out areas, those areas that are slide prone, and unfortunately when you overlay the two, they seem to match up pretty well. Damage cost, we've done some very preliminary engineering in terms of what it has cost us to engage our people, our equipment, in the firefighting effort. We provided this to the Federal Highway Administration because we will seek emergency relief funding from them. Our total right now, and please believe me, this is preliminary, so no one burn this into their brain, but we're somewhere between $4 and $6 million. And that's just on people and equipment. That's not infrastructure. We collect those. We do appreciate the Federal Highway Administration actually issuing a $1 million check for quick release to address some of these financial implications of the fire. So as the months or the weeks and the months continue to play themselves out, we will continue to assess the fires that have hit us both in the Region 1, 2, 3, and 4 area. So more to come, Madam Chair, but that's where we stand today. With that, I will stand down.
Please.
Matt, I'm just curious about the traffic flow when I-84 was closed and now with the eastbound, fully closed, and now with the eastbound closed. Can we characterize how the traffic that needs to get through there is flowing? I mean, I assume a lot of it's going over to Washington.
Yeah. No, it's a good question, Commissioner. A couple things going on here. If you're in a vehicle, you're taking SR 14, but eastbound lanes on SR 14 are closed to trucks, much like our eastbound. Their westbound lanes are open, so they're mirroring the situation on 84. In no way do I want to diminish the economic or the inconvenience that this is having on people, but again, our decisions are truly based on the safety of our people and the traveling public. I understand the implications elsewhere. That's not lost on me. We do have an alternative or detour route that it seems to be working very well in terms of getting people to and fro. Now, it takes a little more time, but that's moving people up 26, and then depending on the configuration of a truck, you can take 35 on the backside of Mount Hood there and get off about, I think it's exit 62 and continue east on 84, or continue out 197 up to the Biggs area and then get back on 84. Now that's working pretty well, and it has allowed folks to move from point A to point B. It's just slower, and that has an implication too. There's a cost associated, a trucking industry cost associated with just the hours of delay it takes to move product to market right now. But it has worked for us. We're fortunate we had that alternative route. So we'll cross our fingers. We'll hope everything falls into place and we can open up at least one lane on that eastbound route.
Traffic?
Rail
through the
traffic
gorge?
has been compromised every so often, given the trees literally falling across the rails. So we work very closely with the Union Pacific. Right now, rail is running, but they're just as vulnerable as we were in terms of what's coming down the mountain, because it drops right onto their track. So still work very closely with them as well.
When the rail can't go, when UP can't go through the gorge, is there any cooperation with BN on the other side to?
I haven't had that conversation. I would hope the two Class I railroads would have had that conversation.
I would hope so.
Excellent, Director. Thank you very much. And I would anticipate that we're working closely with the Trucking Association to make sure that the alternatives that we are providing also meet the needs of their members. And it is a tragic situation that we have had this year, well, in many years in Oregon, but I think even more tragic if we were to have something occur due to trees or whatnot. So I definitely support the direction of the agency. Thank you very much. And I also think it's important that we put on the record, many who decide to go to work for ODOT do not necessarily think that they would find themselves in that type of a situation. And when you think about what is happening in terms of the catastrophic fires and such, we tend to think of people like my brothers who are firefighters, and we tend to think of law enforcement, and we think of those that are trained to do that type of work. Our first responders as well are putting themselves in harm's way to protect the public, and I just wanted to make sure that we sent out a great thank you to them, first for signing up for the job, and second for doing such a great job. So just wanted to say that as well. Any other comments? All right, so let's move on to public comment, and I do want to note that I will be taking public comment on items D, H, and L on our agenda. So let's go. Do I have a sheet for public, just general public comment yet? Okay, so no one has general public comment. Before I go ahead and close the public comment, okay, we will have comment on those other items. So let's move on to item C. And this is a presentation on the Oregon Department of Transportation's plans for implementation of the Historic House Bill 2017. And wait, we have oh, not a problem, not a problem. Okay, whoops, if you're running the camera, just make sure we look good. So let's go forward with Johan Hellman. I have, please join us. Great to see you. And do state your name for the record, and the floor is yours.
Testing. There we go. Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Garrett, and members of the Commission for this opportunity to testify about the temporary rule regarding the Connect Oregon program listed as Order D on today's agenda. For the record, my name is Johan Hellman, and I'm the Regional Assistant Vice President of Government Affairs for the BNSF Railway Company. I am speaking today as Chair of the Oregon Rail Users League, also known as ORUL, a group of large and small railroads, shippers, passenger rail advocates, and others who support freight and passenger rail in Oregon. And to your comments, Madam Chair, let me just say that this commission always looks good from my perspective, so appreciate your time this morning. As background, ORUL expressed concerns during the 2017 session about the new precedent of assigning ORUL funds directly to specific projects, rather than through the long-standing competitive process that has been central to Connect Oregon for the duration of its existence and has resulted in a more deliberative, thoughtful process where diverse stakeholders come together to identify strategic projects with regional significance in a little more detail and specificity than maybe could be achieved through the legislative process, as valuable and important as that is. Speaking to the temporary rule before you this morning, we have a specific concern with the language in the new rules section, particularly the language on page 6 that says, and I quote, "If the department receives more than one qualified pre-proposal submission for a single dedicated project, then the funds to develop the project plan for that dedicated project will be divided equally among the eligible project sponsors." It seems this could dilute public resources into preliminary planning for projects that may not even occur. For example, in a situation where 3 competing projects are competing to be sited in roughly the same geographic location, it stands to reason that 2 of those projects would probably never make it beyond the concept stage because, after all, only one project can win. So we question whether this is the best use of the state's limited public resources, or if projects should be more fully formed before they reach the funding stage or conversations thereof. This language, combined with other concerns we brought forward during session, raised some important issues about new precedent, the new direction in which it seems Connect Oregon may be moving. To that, I would just add that Connect Oregon is a national model, and perhaps the best example of a state program that focuses on filling strategic gaps in the transportation network, those last-mile connectors and public-private partnerships that can give Oregon a strategic advantage in siting new economic development projects, increasing transportation velocity, and improving quality of life. We understand these are temporary rules and that there will likely be much discussion to follow, so we look forward to future conversations. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Oh, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes?
Take advantage of, I'm going to put
Please.
back on the that good-looking Burlington Northern.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lohman, the question was asked, what's the relationship with the rail potentially being compromised? Has there been conversations between Union Pacific and BNSF?
Yeah, I can say that there is reciprocity between the railroads. And I know that we're big companies that compete aggressively against each other, and that is true. But particularly in situations where we're dealing with natural events like what we've seen along the Columbia River Gorge, it's really the law of the open ocean. You know, if you're a vessel and you come into distress, other vessels in the area are obligated to come and help you out. And there's that kind of spirit among the railroads as well. We deploy equipment when there's an event that's near our tracks, but maybe not directly affecting it. Maybe it's an event that doesn't have anything to do with the railroad. We still deploy equipment and make that available to first responders. We make that available to other railroads as well. For example, when there was the derailment in Mosier last summer, we deployed our equipment without hesitation. And we have a lot of specialized firefighting equipment that we use, and we make that available to the states as well as they're addressing these issues. When it comes time to put that whole area back together again after could be a fire, it could be an earthquake, it could be some other event. We work cooperatively to move the equipment around and to get cargo out in the way that it makes sense. Now that's specific to each individual incidents. There may be higher priorities based on something that happens, and we need to accommodate that. But there's a lot of communication and work together to ensure that we're bringing everything back online as quickly as we can.
We certainly appreciate that spirit.
Thank
And
you.
appreciate your time. Nice to see you.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
for making time. All right, and I, in my expediency to try to get our public comment on, I did not note that those are both for Connect Oregon. Mr. Mannix, do you want to hold up? There you are. If you'd like to join us now, you're welcome to. And I do understand your comments are also on item D, so we'll just put those right in that record. Nice to see you, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Kevin Mannix. I'm an attorney in private practice in Salem. Today, though, I appear in my capacity as director of the Oregon Shipping Group. We have over 40 businesses that support our work in advocating for the improvement of freight shipping capability in the state of Oregon. And we were happy to work with the legislature on this transportation package. We supported the transportation package, even though we had some misgivings about certain portions of it. We thought that the totality of the package was for the greater good and was an important improvement for the state of Oregon. I will, for a moment, comment on the prior speaker's remarks about the temporary rules. When you look at the rule that he was concerned about, there is an important word in there. This is on page 6, the section he was concerned about. It requires a qualified pre-proposal submission. So it's not going to be a nitty-gritty, hey, let's just throw this out there and whoever comes in with a piece of paper gets to get a piece of the action, so to speak. You have to have a qualified pre-proposal submission. Secondly, there is a cap on the amount of funds to be expended for the development, and that's 5%. So 95% of the funds have to go to the actual project. I'm here actually in support of the temporary rules, and I am going to submit to your staff an original and more than 10 copies of some suggested changes. I did email these to Director Garrett yesterday, not meant, oh, you do have them in front of you, not meant to be a surprise. Most of these actually could be considered in the context of the permanent rules. But one element I think is important. There is the timeline for how this process is going to move forward in terms of when people should expect to have a complete plan submitted to go through the final process. And your deadline is January 1, 2020 in the temporary rules. I suggest that it be January 1, 2019. That does not mean the project's going to be anywhere near completion, but we would like to see an expedited process. And that's the other reason why we've covered the other rules here and said there ought to be timelines for when reviews occur. We thought 60 days would be an appropriate timeline process. And when the department director and the director of OBDD are doing their reviews, we think the rules should specify that they can collaborate. And if they have a joint agreement about their recommendations, they should be able to do that in tandem without having to do that separately. We think that the temporary rules are very well crafted. And the policy comment I would add is the dedicated projects went into this unique transportation bill. We are not going to see the likes of such legislation for a long time to come. I think we'll probably be returning to the more traditional Connect Oregon process in the future. But in this extraordinary piece of legislation, I think it was important for the legislative leaders to be able to come to an agreement on what their priorities are and present them to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as noted, we do have your letter, and we will have an opportunity to review those comments when we have the next item as well. So thank you for your involvement and support.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Okay. And I have a last individual who is interested in testifying on item H. Which is the Safe Routes to School. If you'd like to go now, you're welcome to. I'm being generous with time this morning, so please, yes, we'll just go forward with comments. So please, state your name for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and OTC Commissioners. My name is Lawton Elliott DeAngelis, and I am the Safe Routes to School Coordinator for Springfield, Oregon. And this morning I'm here on behalf of the Eugene Springfield Safe Routes to School regional team. We, in the Eugene Springfield metro area, have a regional model for Safe Routes to School coordination. We have a coordinator in each school district, as well as a regional Safe Routes to School coordinator that we all work together to roll out our strategic vision for Safe Routes to School, both in infrastructure, as the HB 2017 funding will support, as well as in education and encouragement. Having reviewed together the information about the rulemaking advisory committee for the Safe Routes to School funding, we just had a couple of suggestions that we would like to make. The first being the language currently calls out someone from the Oregon Safe Routes to School network. And though we feel like that's a very important role, we would like to specifically call out the Oregon Safe Routes to School strategic leadership team. This is an organization that is working to roll out a strategic vision for the state and has a long history of supporting Safe Routes to School efforts. And we feel like their specific background and knowledge would be really important on this advisory committee. Secondly, we would also like to see some kind of transportation planner that has staffing experience and maybe experience with the Safe Routes to School grant funding in the past, as well as project delivery on Safe Routes to School type projects. And finally, we would like to suggest that the decision to take 50% of the funding off the top for ODOT projects, that be reevaluated, and that all funding processes be developed by the rulemaking committee to prioritize schools and infrastructure projects that are most needed to benefit students. And in addition, I just want to say that we're so excited about this funding. We think that it means such great things for the state and for students specifically and their ability to get safely to and from school. So thank you very much, and I could take any questions if you have them.
By chance, do you have your comments in writing so that we can have those to review? Is that in our packet as well? Okay.
I do not, but I
okay.
could submit them if that's still an opportunity.
I believe we're going to be moving forward with the temporary rules today. I think we've captured it. You may want to stick around for that particular item. If you're planning on peeling off, that may be a challenge. We want to make sure that we have, in case we have comments or questions during that time, we may want to ask you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. All right. Let's go ahead. Any other comments for general public comments? Oh, Commissioner Nyquist, yes. It's a Friday, right? So let's just, great to see you. Connect Oregon? Are we item D?
D, I believe.
All righty.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. For the record, Roger Nyquist. I'm a Lynn County Commissioner. We support the temporary rules that have been proposed with what I would describe as a couple wordsmithing suggestions, a comma here, a word there. I won't bore you with the details of that. You can take it or leave it. But mostly, we're eager to get started. And we are concerned on the timeline. The sooner the better. We have ag producers in our region that shipping has become a big issue for, exporting obviously, as Mr. Mannix said. And I had a local guy who ships to Japan call me this morning, and he estimates that a reload facility in the Mid-Valley could reduce his shipping costs by 40%. And in ag, that's the difference between making money and losing money. So anything you can do in the way of an expedited process, we'd appreciate, and we're eager to get started. Thank you.
Excellent, Commissioner. Do we have questions or comments? All right, we will put that on to this next agenda item as well. Any other comments for general public comment? And we will be taking, I will ask again for those other items. Okay, hearing none, let's go on to, let's see, let's go on to item C. Leah.
Good morning, Chair Boehne and Commissioners. Leah Horner, Government Relations for ODOT. And I will be quick this morning. I just wanted to come as kind of a follow-up to the conversation we had on implementation of House Bill 2017 last month. And just give you kind of 3 updates on a couple of things. And 2 of those are actually in the packets. One of the things that we didn't discuss last month was 2 memos that came forward to both the governor and the and to the commission around expectations that came from both the co-chairs and the co-vice chairs of the Joint Transportation Committee during session. I think their notes indicate that, you know, as the session was quickly ticking away, there were a number of issues that they realized would need technical fixes or further conversation heading into session. So one of the memos that they provided was what their intention was around technical fixes and conversations heading into the February session. And we expect to see a committee bill from that committee to start dealing with those technical fixes. A number of the fixes that they brought forward and identified within their memo are ones that came from our testimony that we submitted on the -10 amendments. There are a number of fixes that have also been identified that were ones that we did not bring forward. So I know they as a committee were hearing other issues from other entities, and so that's also captured in that document. There were also a couple of issues that we did bring forward that were also not captured in what their intent is during February session. So I just wanted to flag that we are very aware of the memo and are continuing to collect technical fixes as well as questions around legislative intent that maybe could need a technical fix, but maybe we could figure out a different process or a better process as opposed to seeking legislation for some of those components. So if there's specific questions about some of the pieces in the memo, I'm happy to go over those. But I just kind of wanted to give an overview on that letter that did come to you all. The second letter is probably the one that folks are paying a little bit closer attention to. And that one identified each of the projects that were identified in the bill, along with a price tag, along with a timeline for when they should be funded. So if you look at House Bill 2017, there were projects identified by region with a total dollar amount. So this document that was sent over provides a little bit more detail as to what the expectations were around when projects should be funded and how much they should cost. So to the complete credit of the legislature, they also identified that we weren't getting all of this cash up front. And so what would be an appropriate way to kind of phase in how we were appropriating the money. So this was their attempt to kind of take a look at that, and they put what they deemed feasible to them at the time on this document. So for implementation purposes, we're kind of using this as our Bible at this point, for lack of a better term. We will continue to have conversations with the Joint Committee about these timelines, if there are things that should move faster, if there are things that should move slower. But I also just wanted to make sure that we had both of these letters on the record to make sure that we were mindful of these as we were moving forward with implementation. The other thing that I just wanted to kind of give a follow-up from last month is that I was able to find a project manager, which I'm very excited about. So Kat Silva is on board with us now and is helping oversee the implementation of the bill, making sure that we have nothing falling through the cracks, and also providing a tremendous amount of in-depth documents to make sure that all of our tracking processes are on point. So as that continues to get fleshed out, we will continue to bring documents forward and have further conversations about our timelines and how our implementation is working. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that, you know, my general mantra is that the bill's still not in effect, so we have until October 6th, but we are definitely heading in the right direction on everything at this point.
Well, a couple of points. I've had the pleasure of working with Kat at Oregon Housing and Community Services, and I think that she's an excellent addition to the team. So I look forward to having you here on this side. But I would also, so as we're looking at the technical issues or corrections, Section 10 and the piece in relationship to the identified necessity for clarifying transportation stakeholders. It was my understanding that that was to give the Transportation Commission discretion in terms of what they may need in terms of outreach and technical or even professional expertise to inform on certain things. So it wasn't meant to be locked in of these are the members that are part of that committee, period. So whatever changes we may want to make there, I would make sure that it isn't so prescripted that we don't have flexibility to move. It's a new committee. We don't know what it might need yet. So I would probably populate it slightly lighter in the beginning and then add as necessary. But I just don't want to box ourselves into not being able to have the right people around the table.
Chair Boehne, I appreciate that comment, and I think you're absolutely right around the intent on that. And I think we can definitely make sure that we have that flexibility in there.
Excellent. Okay. Other questions or thoughts? Please.
There we go. You mentioned that some of the fixes that we had wanted the legislature to consider in this upcoming short session, they didn't include in this letter. I am assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that we will be bringing those issues up again, and that the legislature has not said we're not interested. They just didn't happen to include it in these letters.
Commissioner Lohman, so the top two issues that they did not address in this, I can see that they may not quite consider them technical fixes. So the first one was on jurisdictional transfers. And our feedback on Section 134 was there's not enough revenue identified in here to actually make significant change in how we deal with jurisdictional transfers. So my sense of that is that they understand that, but that's probably a larger conversation around bigger than a technical fix, if you will. But it is something that we will continue to engage in conversations in, including, continuing to look for revenue sources that may be viable for that. The other issue that we brought forward was in Section 147 around severability. And we had some questions and clarifications that we were seeking around if we had legislative mandates coming out as a result of a bill, but then if some of the sections were severed and we weren't receiving revenue to actually implement that, what would that look like? So we were asking for technical clarifications on those pieces to make sure that we weren't held liable for something that was an unfunded mandate, basically. So that is another piece of the conversation that we will continue to have during session.
Good, those are pretty important
Yes,
issues.
they are.
And speaking from a local government's standpoint, I was interested to read that section on jurisdictional transfers, and I hope the legislature understands that it ain't going to happen from the locals' standpoint if there isn't funding to make it even feasible for them to undertake jurisdictional transfer.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Please, Commissioner Brown.
I'm on. You can't see it. That's the problem. You can't see the little red thing until. So thank you very much, Leah. I appreciate the updates. And my question's for you and probably for Director Garrett. But given the list of transportation projects and order of said projects, how are you feeling about that? Are we on track to make that happen? Is there anything that's a surprise? I know that House Bill 2017 also has quite a few wickets that we have to hit in order to have the funding mechanism. We both can't have it all at the same time.
Really? Well, it's quite the entry into this conversation.
I guess you wanted me to finish my question.
I apologize for that. Commissioner Brown, Madam Chair, no, we have had extensive conversations all during the crafting, creation, and the delivery of House Bill 2017. The pace is aggressive. We know we have to lace up to deliver, especially some of those programs, as you say, that have triggers associated with them. There's some early work on 205 that I'm thinking of right now. But we're confident we have the appropriate professionals in place to get the job done. So we understand the timelines. We actually inform some of those as well. There's nothing that puts a knot in my belly right now in terms of what the direction has been. We'll meet the obligations.
I think it also couples nicely with Bob Gebhard's work in terms of procurement contracting and working with our partners. We won't be able to execute alone, obviously. We have many owners of the system and many partners of the system. And so I think it's an important conversation that we continue to have of refining our processes and making sure that our procurement and contracting and et cetera, that entire package, meets the needs of, to be able to execute in a timely fashion and get these on the ground.
If I may, Madam Chair, Leah and her professionals have scheduled meetings with all the partners. Remember, this is a comprehensive bill that touches every aspect of transportation, but it also spills out into other areas, other agencies, in terms of the way we collect money. So we've had conversations with the Department of Revenue about the obligations and the responsibilities and the timelines associated with how you collect a new payroll, a payroll tax. A statewide payroll tax, or a privilege tax, or a bike tax. Similar conversations with our local government partners in terms of some of the reporting disciplines and structures, the creation or the expansion of the small city program as well. Conversation about long-term planning with some of our sister agencies that are in the transportation world, but outside the agency, so the good folks at Aviation, Business Oregon, the Marine Board. So Leah and her folks are making sure there is a tight, Leah and Kat, making sure there is a tight understanding, again, of the obligations and responsibilities from all the players, given the gravity of meeting those obligations, and in some terms, obligations that carry significant financial implication.
Okay, other comments or thoughts? Okay, Ms. Horner, thank you so much. All right, let's move on to item D, which is the discussion about Connect Oregon funds and projects that were specified within House Bill 2017, and consider adoption of temporary rules. And just for the good of the folks that are with us, I will be asking for public comment again. If you have further refinement or points you'd like to make, do just let me know that you'd like to approach the commission. So, Ms. Bohard, Mr. Turner, I'll turn it over to both of you.
Okay. Good morning, Commission. For the record, my name is Jerry Bohard. I'm the Transportation Development Division Administrator. And with me is Scott Turno from the Freight Group. So I'm going to walk through the Connect Oregon rules. Just a reminder that not only do you have the temporary rules in there, but you have the justification that allows us for the temporary rules. Really, so the objective here is that you approve the temporary rules. They would not go into effect until October 6th when the bill goes into effect. And then obviously because they're temporary, we would be turning around and working to make them permanent. We have 180 days, so from October 6th to April 4th is when they would need to become permanent. So just, I guess, lay the foundation a little bit. As you may recall from the bill, the legislature really did establish some pretty aggressive timelines. And they also, I think in some of the letters that you saw from, indicated the years that the project should receive funding. But they didn't establish criteria or a process for the development of the plans or the projects. So leaving some areas needing rules to be really clear about that. Within the bill, there is 5% that's set aside for planning. It's roughly a little less than $3 million. And as you can see from the testimony that we already heard this morning, there are already a number of inquiries regarding what are the requirements going to be for the planning process, and obviously happening even before the effective date. So that's why I think it's really incumbent upon us to do these temporary rules. We did work with Department of Justice, and I know that Ms. Heitch is in the audience, to ensure that we met the requirements for the temporary rule. And as I mentioned, have 180 days. So there were 4 projects that were identified in House Bill 2017. The Mid-Willamette Valley Intermodal Facility at $25 million, the Treasure Valley Intermodal Facility at $26 million, and then 2 rail expansion projects, one in the Port of Morrow and for a little over $6.5 million, and then one in the Brooks Rail Siding Extension for $2.6. So I would also say, as we develop these rules, we worked extensively with the public rail and public transit division and their staff, obviously, rail being a key component to all 4 of these projects. And then Business Oregon was so helpful as we went through this. They are very familiar with infrastructure projects. They do loans, all of those things. So they have a lot of programs in place that we were able to glean some very helpful information. And as we always reminded Chris Cummings, he's just never going to get away from Connect Oregon. It's going to come back to him one way or the other. So he also was very helpful for this. Obviously, the Department of Justice played into this as well. So I know timeline, people have had a little confusion about it, but I'm just going to use it very quickly just to give you a sense of, so here we are, September 22nd. We have a statutory deadline of January 1. We're really interpreting that to mean when projects are going to be under construction. October 6th, the effective date of the rule, so just really looking at what happens in between that. I think we are hearing a fair amount of comments regarding the February 1st sort of pre-proposal deadline, that perhaps we were giving people a little bit more time than they needed. So I think that is one that's a very easy fix. This timeline really just does represent the fact that we would need to do an intergovernmental agreement with regards to the planning funds. We envision that most likely it will take folks about 9 months to a year to finish the plan associated with the work that they're doing, and then we would need to do another agreement with them before things would go under construction. So that really was the intent of that diagram. What I would say, though, is that really when we're thinking about the temporary rules, we're concentrating for the most part on the transload facilities. But we do have the other 2 rail projects. And so you can see in purple what we call C and D. And there's a recognition there that there isn't the pre-proposal. Those locations have been essentially identified. The applicant has been identified. And so we see the planning process for that being much more streamlined and simple. I think the comments have been all on A and B, but just recognize that there is language in the temporary rule around C and D. The plan there that we've identified in that pretty much follows what they would have done in a Connect Oregon application for the most part. There just isn't the review process. So we have identified that work as well. I think this gets sort of articulated a little bit better in this slide, where you see that in C and D we're just able to jump to an agreement relative to once they provide their information. So I will step back though and talk about A and B, that we do have in there the requirement for the pre-proposal. So we tried to find that balance between getting enough information to see that they were a serious contender versus also not trying to make it too overwhelming. So when we thought about the qualifications of the project sponsor, what's their organizational structure of the sponsor and their partners, what's their knowledge around development of these types of projects, what's their capacity to manage an intermodal facility, and just some general information about their business case, the general location, the rationale for the location, who they see as their customers, commodities, some sense of preliminary costs and estimates for the facility. So again, trying to get enough information to make sure they've been thoughtful about the project, but not trying to be too cumbersome at the same time. We do, however, have a fair amount of language in there with regards to the expectation of what goes into the actual plan itself. The location and the selection analysis, the scope of work, the purpose and need, evidence of site ownership or control. I'll talk a little bit more about feasibility analysis in a minute. What's the cost, the estimated cost for design and capital construction? What's the return on investment? What does that analysis look like? And I think most importantly, one of the things that we learned through the Connect Oregon process, a written concurrence from the rail entity that they're on board with this project. And then anticipated impacts around transportation coming into the facility. What's the useful life of the project? So something we heard out of Connect Oregon. And then really the project schedule, including milestones. So again, what's the information that we need to put into the agreement? When we think about the feasibility analysis, so what's the commodity and the products likely to be served? what's the anticipated market area, what's the market share, what's the anticipated transportation cost savings, and so on. So we are trying to be, I think, pretty thoughtful about what we wanted to see go into the plan. And I was actually heartened to hear the comments that we had this morning that most people, that wasn't the issue. It was about let us get started quicker. So I think that was very good news. So the review process, and I think that Mr. Mannix is correct, there's probably some work that we can do in really establishing the timeline for how this review process would work. I do believe it is something that should occur in the permanent rule, but I think that is something that we should include and was an oversight on our part. So one of the things that we recognized as we thought about these projects is that we really needed a third-party review. The type of feasibility analysis, the economic development, is not really the strengths of the knowledge that our agency has. So we've identified the need for a third-party review with really that economic analytical expertise. We also recognize that there's a lot of benefit, very similar to the final review committee that we had for Connect Oregon, having that dedicated project review committee. So wanting to make sure there's no conflict of interest, so we don't know what that looks like yet, but people with freight and economic expertise. So they would be taking the information that we learned from the neutral party and then providing their recommendations and thoughts. All of that would then be shared with the two directors, Director Garrett and then the Director of Business Oregon. Ultimately, those two individuals would be formulating their recommendation that they would forward on to you as the commission. And then depending on the yes or the no, we would be going to the agreement that we would build with regards to construction. So finally, just sort of the next steps, recognize that we have to be working with some of the potential recipients affected by the temporary rule. Clearly, as I mentioned earlier, bringing this temporary rule, it's got a 180-day clock. But bringing it to permanent, so we'll be coming to you sometime in early spring. There are a lot of timelines the Secretary of State has that sort of limits how quickly you can move. It really is a 3 to 4 month process, just working with the Secretary of State. And then also just sort of a reminder that this concentrates on what we need to do for these 4 dedicated projects. But there is actual rule work that we're going to need to do just for the Connect Oregon process in general, because in House Bill 2017, they broke it up into Part 1 and Part 2 around state significance. And then most importantly as well, public transportation is no longer part of the Connect Oregon program. And I think you'll hear Hal Gard talk about that relative to his work. So with that, unless I missed anything that you would like to add, I would turn it back to the commission.
All right, support team today, Scott. Okay, so what I'd like us to do is to have a dialogue about this particular piece, and then Jerry and Scott, if you wouldn't mind distilling that for us and bringing it back so we can move forward on the temporary rules today, but then also help us parse through what we feel should be, and I'm kind of looking at Bonnie as well, of what should be more in the permanent rules. And so I can go and see if we have other public comment, or would you like to have comments at this point? Please.
I'd like to have public comment if they have it.
Okay, excellent. We will get this. All right. Is there anyone who would like to approach the commission on this particular item that has not, or has other comments you want us to consider? All right. Well, there we have it. So we do have, and Jerry, do you have Commissioner Nyquist's comments in front of you as well?
No, I do not.
Okay, so I would love us to have, okay, do you mind getting, so we can go through some of the recommendations that he has noted. And first, let me say, I really think that this is a great opportunity for our economy in Oregon. And for some of the communities that have been struggling for decades, this will bring just opportunities that we just cannot even imagine. And so I see this as a wonderful investment going forward. But I also want to say thank you to the team for playing to our strengths because I think that interaction of this scale of investment, technical investments in a way as well, making sure that we're doing that aligned with those that also can help to strengthen and make sure that we have the best projects for the best return for Oregon. So I want to make sure that that isn't left out there, that I really appreciate that very much. And being able to articulate through the feasibility that they really will garner the return for Oregon, that we are making this investment in good faith and that they will bring about that economic opportunity. So you have in front of you Commissioner Nyquist's comments. Do you want to take a moment to look those over? In particular, of course, the date change. I think we have a recommendation for from February 1st of 18 to December 1st of 17. That may be a little aggressive, but certainly a consideration. I think the biggest pieces are 8 and 9.
Yeah. To speak first to the date, obviously that's a very simple fix. I think I'm heartened by the fact that the potential recipients are interested in moving the
bet.
date. We had assumed a little bit differently, wanting to give them some time. That is definitely something that is just sort of a change in a few words here and there. That's a easy fix. So I sort of, in a sense, deferred to them. December 1st, January 1st. Clearly, February 1st was too late for them. I think either the easy fix, and I defer on what date.
I'm inclined more January 1st, but I'll throw that out for the will of the group. Please, Commissioner.
I guess I have a little concern, and I'd like to hear some more comment from you, Jerry, on this. But first of all, I really appreciate the third-party review idea and the project review committee idea. And I say that because I've seen other projects, well, not ODOT projects, but other projects by other agencies, state and federal, that were very important to get done, like these are, and people kind of chomping at the bit to get them done, and they didn't get well thought through. And I'm worried a little bit that we're going to rush something through here because everybody wants this so much, without having thought through all the issues that need to be addressed. I guess one question I have in relation to that is, do we know whether we are going to have multiple proposers on these two projects, A and B?
So it's a little difficult for me to respond to that. I believe I'm going to use the word hearsay, for lack of a better word, that in the Treasure Valley, not as likely that we'll probably have one, but I would say fairly likely that we will see multiple ones in the valley.
Okay, and I'm encouraged by that, actually, because that little bit of competition I think is useful. But particularly if we're only going to end up with one proposer, I want to make sure that there's a lot of rigor to this process, and that they're really submitting something that they have thought through fully, and that we're not going to look back on 4 years from now and say, oh gosh, this didn't work because we were so anxious to make it happen that we didn't think about some things.
So I think, Commissioner, one of the ways I would respond to that is that certainly in the planning process, I think what we have there is pretty complete, but we also framed it in a way that allows interaction with staff. So this is not, sometimes we do grants that we say, get it done, and if you got the right color, we'll approve it. If you don't have the right color, you're SOL. That's not the way this is set up. This is really set up to be more of a conversation between, and quite honestly, I would say Business Oregon. They're sort of glued to the hip with us on this. So there's an opportunity to make sure that the conversation happens. The language in here really does provide opportunity whether in the pre-proposal or in the final plan, for the applicant to provide other information that makes their case. So if they see something that we missed as part of the plan that they want to highlight, there's that opportunity. So the plan it's set up sort of as the minimum versus the maximum, so.
Okay. Well, I guess, at
And then,
least for my, go ahead.
I was gonna say, the only other thing I would add is, as you think about this, and certainly with the permanent rule, we have a little bit more time. If there's that one item that perhaps we missed in the plan, we still have an opportunity to do it in the permanent rule, because likely by the time we do the pre-proposal date, if it's January 1 to the time we do the IGA, you're only talking 3 months. So they haven't barely started working on their plan. So I think there's opportunity for us to think about that a little bit more and put anything else into the rule. And if you have additional thoughts on that, that would be great.
Okay, well, just speaking for myself, I think moving back to December 1st is really too quick.
Okay.
And I suppose January 1st, I would be much prefer January 1st to December 1st, I'll put it that way.
Okay, could we put the timeline up, please? So that we. December 1st is the request, January 1st, I too agree that I'm excited that folks feel ready. I think it's been a long time coming to have this type of investment, and folks have been waiting for the opportunity, so. Thoughts in terms, we can come back to that as well. I would like to discuss the idea of adding a piece that makes us a bit more intentional around community support. And maybe this is in the pre-proposal submission area where we add language that draws out that community piece, which I think in order for success is critical in moving forward.
Okay.
So
That would be a very easy fix.
Okay.
I think it might be helpful even in that to think about perhaps something that acknowledges that the rail is working with them. I wouldn't go any farther than that because they can't sign on the dotted line yet, but.
Right.
But I think, yeah, we could easily, right now, this afternoon, provide you language on that.
Okay.
That language already sort of exists for the plan, but I'm hearing you want to make sure it's in the pre-proposal.
Well, I think it
So,
draws it to the
Right.
forefront, and I just don't want the commission to find themselves at odds with the community when this is really meant to benefit the community.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Unless anyone has a, please.
I know we're kind of far into this, but on the ROI analysis, I'm just curious if I didn't see, and maybe it's buried somewhere in content that I'm not capturing, but I'm just curious whether or not if one of those ROI impacts is going to look at any environmental impacts as a result of it. I see, job growth and revenue, and that impact on the local economy is one of those metrics. But I was just curious as to why that was not a focus area, and whether or not if it's going to be something that could be considered.
So Scott, I think that's right. We didn't think as much about environmental. We were thinking on the return on investment. I will tell you, however, part of that would happen. These projects are still going to require local permits, depending on the zoning and what the code is for the community that they're working with. So those would normally get addressed at the local level. And so I think that was also the other, is to try not to be duplicative, but there might be in the permanent rule a way to sort of acknowledge that relationship and what's required environmentally, that if they could share with us anyway, right? So if it's required at the local government, please share it with us in the plan. I think that's something we could put into the permanent rule.
Great.
I appreciate underscoring that, and my mind went to the permitting. It doesn't usurp any sort of
Right.
other environmental criteria that any project would need to go through, whether that's federal, state, or local, so.
Okay. So we'll clarify that, though.
Excellent.
Okay.
Commissioner Brown?
So just a quick question, Jerry, and I may have missed this, and it was brought up by one of the speakers. If the department receives more than one qualified pre-proposal submission, do we define qualified? I mean, that's pretty subjective unless we've defined it and I missed it.
Commissioner, you're correct. We left it fairly subjective. It's a hard one to define. That's why the information that we provide, ultimately, it would be at the discretion of the two directors to see which ones were qualified to move forward. We thought it made sense to keep it simple, keep it streamlined. But there is information in there that requires, so.
Okay, I'm a little concerned with that, and then we have not yet discussed the project plan, moving it a year ahead. We talked about a couple of months difference, which really we're splitting hairs, I really don't care. But I think this other where we talk about project plan no later than January 1st, 2020, that seems a long way away. I would agree that if we're trying to move this more quickly, can we move that up?
So we were defining that as really ready for construction. So in other words, if you go back to the timeline, so I'm just keep with the February 1, just because it's on there, giving us a little bit of time to review to make sure that they're qualified.
2 years?
No, to make sure that they're qualified. We would probably see, so taking February 1 sometime in spring, we would have the IGA together. So we're talking about spring of 2018, having the IGA together for them to do their planning. So let's just arbitrarily say April 1st. Probably would take them a year to do their plan. So now you're into April 1st of 2019. About 60 to 90 days to approve the plan. And then that's why we did identify July 1 as expected sort of potentially July 1 as sort of a construction agreement. So the timeline really does identify moving that forward 6 months. That's sort of the drop dead date in our understanding of making sure that the projects are ready to start construction. So we did try to move it 6 months, even with the February date, and if we go to January, it would move it a little bit faster.
And I understand more clearly, perhaps that could be, the language could be cleaned up. I would hate that to have somebody's mind say, oh, that's my start date.
Right.
So maybe we can clean that up and say ready for.
And
no
I think
later than rather than by.
yes, and we can do that as part of the temporary rule, and to be really clear that we're interpreting January 1 to be ready to start construction. So.
I think what I'd want to make sure of is that that is as Commissioner Brown mentioned, so I think some of these projects are really, and if we look at the state's economy and the export, we need to get these moving faster if they're ready and can fulfill all the requirements. I also want to make sure that because we can take until January 1, or we as an agency can wait longer, that we are not. So how do we back that up to a date that makes sure that we are all moving in the direction that if a project is ready sooner, if we don't have a timeline that actually states that it's on or before, so before could be, if I'm understanding you correctly, before could be January of 19, but does that mean that we would be ready to receive that at January 19? I just want to make sure that
Right.
that's aligned, because
So
expediency is important.
Commissioner Boehne, I think that's where Mr. Mannix's comments are very appropriate. So in the IGA for the planning, we would identify the date that they anticipate, and it would be based on their request, the date that they anticipate their plan being done. So if we put into the permanent rule sort of the timeline for the review, so in other words, how long we give the neutral party, how long we give the dedicated committee, how long we give the directors before it comes to the commission, then I think that does set the clock, and that is the part that is missing in the rule. I think that would be difficult for me to make sure that we've thought all the the linkages there, and would request that we do that as part of the permanent rule. But that is, so the two things that I'm hearing so far with regards to the permanent rule is that we need to add a timeline for review, and that with regards to the ROI, we need to be thinking about putting some language in there around environmental. What I'm hearing right now for at least potentially is for the temporary rule that we can do today is to potentially change the date of when the pre-proposals are due, to put language in around community support, and also to be clear that the January 1 statutory date is really about being ready to start construction. So those, at least just listening to the conversation to date and the public comment that I've heard, those are things that I'm seeing that I can, how I would place them, I guess.
So then, point of clarification, so we would essentially, because I'm reviewing Mr. Mannix's comments as well, so this essentially would be if we're all thinking along the same timeline, okay, so a project comes in and we have review periods. Those review periods, we have a certain amount of time that they have to
Correct.
review it from the time that it was submitted,
From
not
the
from
time
the
that it
time
was-
of the, okay.
Yes,
I
from
just
the
want to
time
make
that it
sure
was submitted.
we're
And
not-
that's why I think making sure we're really clear on that language
Okay,
might be a little tricky to do between now and the close of business today.
okay. Commissioner?
And Jerry, just to be clear, so we have 180 days to do temporary language
To finish, to permanent language, yes.
and then permanent language, so perhaps on your timeline, put a flag where the permanent,
Okay, so
just so we know we're talking
Okay.
temporary.
Yep.
Those that still have comments, those that dive into it a little deeper,
Right.
perhaps we can get a definition of
Right.
some of these things, and then permanent comes in at what
Yeah,
time?
the drop dead date from October 6th is April 4th, so we would be coming to you at the latest your March commission meeting with the permanent rule.
Commissioner?
A couple of issues raised by Commissioner Nyquist. He talks about item 5D, Roman numeral 6. And is this on, towards the bottom of page 6. He wants to see the word construction removed when we're talking about the sponsor proving up its ability to deliver the project and cover project construction costs until reimbursements are made. I'm not sure I understand the purpose of that, of his purpose of wanting to remove the word construction. It seems to me we clearly want the project sponsor to be able to show that they're going to be able to cover the construction costs until reimbursement can be made. Is
So I'm
this
gonna-
something you've thought about? And
I'm going to defer to Scott because he's had a little chance to look at the
Okay,
the
good.
letter, so.
Right, yeah, I would tend to agree.
And,
Oh,
thank
sorry,
you.
sorry, it's Scott Turnoy, Freight Planning Program Manager with ODOT. I would tend to agree with your question. Our thought process with that language and this part of the feasibility analysis description within the temporary rule is really to speak to the applicant or potential recipient's ability to cover costs for the project. We specify construction costs really to get to our new kind of reality with regards to the Connect Oregon Fund and our kind of more accrual basis for financial contributions into that fund. And we're in a different setting than we've been in the past, where we've had a set amount dedicated to distribute, kind of at one time. This new scenario will have to be more in a cash flow. So we don't know with real certainty that we'll have the ability to reimburse at the time that the request is made. So this information is really crucial, that the potential recipient has that financial capacity, as they move forward through the project, and then as they come back for reimbursement, we can then, we can make those reimbursements as able. So this is really important.
It seems to me it is. If you leave out construction costs, you're leaving out the major costs. And if we're not able to even know when we're going to be able to reimburse them because of our cash flow, we have to be sure that they're going to be able to make it until we can reimburse them. A similar question comes up on his third point with respect to item 9, which is top of page 9, where in the third sentence, we have a sentence in there now proposed that says, project sponsor will not be reimbursed for any project costs expended prior to the execution of the agreement. Reimbursement of project costs will occur only when there are sufficient funds available. And if I read him correctly, he wants to leave out that part about until sufficient funds are available. And again, we can't leave that out. That's, if we don't have the funds available, we can't be making any commitments. But maybe I'm misreading what he wants to achieve.
I'm not sure. I think because when I think Commissioner Nyquist was up, he mentioned that there was a comma missing, and that's the difference in the sentence
Okay.
right above it. So
Oh,
I don't know if
just
he's
that
back there
sentence above
shaking
it.
his head yes, but
No, I
Okay.
believe he's left,
So,
but I
but
will be going for
that's the-
public comment again in just a
that's
moment.
the difference in at least the first bullet is that we don't have a comma after expended, and he's suggesting one.
Okay.
So-
And then his comment prior to that with respect to section 8, concern about the commission having flexibility as to when
Right.
we look at the application, I guess is the right word. And when we do our review, that seems like a legitimate
Right.
concern, and I think you're sort of addressing that in the conversation with Commissioner Bainey.
Right.
That we will be trying to insert that flexibility into this language.
Correct.
Great.
I just wanted to clarify one point, and that is that we envision the reviewers, the three-part review process, and then coming to the commission for review. We anticipate that all occurring for each of the plans we receive at the same time. We don't want a situation where you're reviewing one set of plans and then others are coming in later. We'd like that review process to start at basically the date that the last plan in their agreement are scheduled to be submitted. And we would hope to set up in their agreements for the plan development identical kind of finish date deadlines for the plans to be submitted. So just to clarify.
I see,
that.
okay.
And that's particularly important if we have multiple
Yeah.
in one. And I just, in number 9, I realized we did have the language in there that says, entering this agreement does not preclude project sponsor from complying with any required federal, state, or local permits. So that even though, so the environmental, I think, is in there, but we'll be more clear in the ROI discussion.
So how will that work if you end up with two proposals from an area? One is ready, one is maybe taking longer. How will that look like in terms of transparency? And I think if one has gone forward and has a complete proposal, will we hold off and because there's hearsay of maybe another one? What will that look like?
So Commissioner, I think that's an area that we're probably still struggling with a bit, to be perfectly honest. So I think one, you can separate out the two geographies, right? So whether it's Treasure Valley or the Willamette Valley. I think what we're envisioning, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, is what we're envisioning is so whatever date they have their pre-proposal, we're seeing who's qualified, we're working through the IGA. So as we're working through the IGA with proposer A and proposer B, we start to get a sense of the timeline. And so what we'd, and if someone says June 1st and the other person says August 1st, we'll either see if we can negotiate between the two of them or acknowledge that we're not going to start the review until August 2nd. So the first proposer will have to wait a couple of months because you need both plans in order to review them. So that will be the tricky part. We're hoping that they both come in relatively close with their timeline. These types of plans should take 9 months to a year. So depending on how much pre-work they've done. that's the best we can do right now. We might have a better sense of that as we think about the permanent rule, but that's sort of how we're envisioning this right now.
Well, maybe you can tell the one who's anticipating being slower that that will be a factor in our consideration of them.
That's definitely could be an option. So.
Well, I think what I don't want to have happen is that the legislature was pretty clear in wanting to see these investments go forward, and time is money. So I'm not hearing from you that we are feeling that we want to take our time slowing just for the sake of being slow, which isn't our style anyway. But I think how we get folks together to make sure, I think it would be difficult to have community support for two different projects. That out of the gate is going to be a challenge. I think you're going to have partners and stakeholders that it'll be tough for them to be supportive of two separate, somewhere that's going to start to filter itself out locally.
So February 1 or January 1, we may know whether or not this is an issue and how we have to deal with it. So that's the difficult part right now.
Give me your impressions on a December 1 versus a January 1 in terms of unintended consequences. If we went with the request of December 1, what does that do?
Well, I don't think there's much, the 30 days. I like the January 1 in part. It's the beginning of a calendar year. It makes it cleaner. The other is that December 1 is right after Thanksgiving, so they might need just a little bit more time to make sure that they really do put forward their best foot forward with regards to the pre-proposal. I think it would also make it easier, quite honestly, working with others during the holidays to get their approval as to whether or not things are qualified. Having that discussion in January would be easier than having that discussion in December. So.
Okay. Commissioner, go right ahead.
About January 2nd. I don't think you're going to be here to receive one on January 1st.
Fair enough. Good point. I appreciate that.
Okay, I would like to go ahead and open it for public comment again. Please, Mr. Mannix, I saw some slight fidgeting, so please join us. And if anyone else has comments, we want to make this the best we can in this temporary phase, so please offer whatever you might have. Mr. Mannix, the floor is yours.
Just press the middle button. There you go.
Again, this is Kevin Mannix. I'm an attorney in Salem, and I'm here on behalf of the Oregon Shipping Group. Let me first say that the Oregon Shipping Group itself will not be submitting its own proposal in this regard. We are aware, however, from having worked with business organizations, that there are probably at least two proponents of projects who may come forward. The good news is that the community support will be there for whoever does this. The community has been saying, and we've been hearing for a long time, we want this intermodal facility. It's important to our local economy and to the state. So I think the community support issue is really, once someone has the project, will they get the community support? They will if they've got a good plan. And it's up to this commission and the Department of Transportation and Business Oregon to make sure it's a good plan. I do want to address the preliminary proposal deadline. Frankly, at least one of the groups that I know of, and maybe two, would love to have you make it November 1, because nobody else will be able to come forward. Because some of us have been working on this issue since last year, and the department has a copy of a preliminary business plan that one group put together. So I'm not trying to hide the ball here. I think January 2 would be a good compromise, because that is enough time for some folks to figure out, do they have people of financial competence and business competence and transportation competence that they can bring together to come forward with a preliminary proposal. So that January 2 date would work, I think, very nicely. Looking at the project plan submission date, I think there's a misunderstanding. The project sponsors must prepare and submit a project plan no later than January 1, 2020. My point was, it's after the project plan comes in that all of these other reviews happen, and that it really ought to be moved up to January 1, 2019, so those reviews can occur during 2019. And that was the concern that we had. And yes, if you've got competition, then finally, after the review process, one or the other knows that the government funds will be made available. So there is some delay there if there's competition, because someone's going to have to wait to find out. From all I've seen, the Treasure Valley project will probably only have one group coming forward. And to be blunt about it, our shipping group became aware of two different entities being interested, and we tried to reach out to get one entity to join in with another, and they weren't willing to do so. They want to go their separate ways. But competition can be healthy. So you'll have an opportunity to see two different perspectives on how this ought to move forward. And the process that's delineated here allows that to happen without taking forever. So I want to disagree a little bit about the 9 months to put together a project plan, because the folks that are really looking at this have been working on it for 9 months already, all the way through session, talking to legislators about it. And on the environmental issue, I do think it's important to talk about the project plan addressing environmental issues, at least in terms of the statewide context. The local regulations may deal with local environmental impact, and we'll certainly have the permit process for that. But in a way, the legislature addressed that, because the positive environmental impact right now of this intermodal facility is the reduction of trucks on the highways. You're using rail as an alternative, and that reduces the use of gasoline, it reduces emissions, it reduces wear and tear on the highways. The local impact is what happens to this local community, and that there will always be a dynamic discussion. I did want to address a couple of other things. The question about that Commissioner Lohman raised about the cover costs, construction costs until reimbursements are made, that's important to be in there, because you need to have a group that's financially capable and responsible, and not a stop and go. Well, we've been constructing for 3 months. Oh, we have to wait until we get our next check, and we'll tell everybody to go home, and 3 months from now we'll come back in. That is not an acceptable approach to this kind of project. It needs to keep flowing, and there needs to be financial backing sufficient to make sure the construction continues as planned. And as to the one other comment, I have not seen Commissioner Nyquist's remarks, but I was listening to this. The entering into this agreement does not preclude the language about the project sponsor will not be reimbursed for any project costs expended prior to the execution of the agreement, and then reimbursement will occur only when there's sufficient funds available. That's a cash flow issue for the state. You need to have a project sponsor that says, we are capable of moving forward, and if there's a delay, we know that at some point under the appropriation, the funds will be available, but we still want the project to keep moving. So I think that language is important to stay in there to make sure that the projects won't be expedited, but they'll be smoothly flowing forward. Again, I want to return to a final comment that I made at the very beginning. I think these rules were very well crafted, and this conversation allows for some fine tuning, but this is going to turn out, in Willamette Valley at least I think, to be a competitive process. But I think that will make it better. And it will require those who are coming forward to understand there's no sure thing here. You need to make sure you've packaged something that will work and will work to the greater benefit of the state. Thank you for the opportunity to comment further.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us again. Do we have any final, yes, please, Director.
Because dates matter in this conversation. It is my recollection that the language that is embedded on page 6, section 5, project sponsors must prepare and submit a project plan to the department no later than January 1 of 2020 in order to be considered for funding. That actually comes out of the bill. Is that correct? That's my understanding. So that is the one date that is statutorily directed. So understand there's not much of a toggle point, other than if someone is locked and loaded and wants to move a project, it makes a whole lot of sense to me. Let's put this project on the ground and allow the benefit to start to accrue if all the disciplines and rigors and scrutinies are applied. But I think that 2020 timeframe is locked down at the far end because it's statutory. Now, logistics, getting back to. So I think it's clear that February 1 submission date has probably been set on the table. And what I hear is maybe we've got two competing interests here. December 1st was placed on the table, as well as January 2nd now. I think from a workforce logistical standpoint, there's not going to be work done after December 15th to the January timeframe. So why not just split the difference? If indeed these entities that have, and I would concur with Mr. Mannix, this is not a new conversation to anybody, because if it is, you've missed the boat. You better have done some spade work. December 15th. Lock and load. Your work's going to be done then anyway. So I just throw that, not to complicate things, but what we've heard over and over again
to
is
ruin
an
my
eagerness to
Christmas.
move forward on this because good things will happen. Now, the onus on this commission and this agency is to ensure that we have the appropriate scrutinies to ensure that the best projects meet all the objective and subjective criteria that we put in there for the pre-proposal and then the plan that moves forward to secure that 5%. Okay, that's on us. But move forward, because there's benefit that will accrue. I would submit that a December 15th is probably a prudent workforce, given the holidays that play themselves out and just the calendars of all the worker bees on both sides of the table, what that will present. So not to complicate things, but just to put what I'm thinking of, knowing how my staff and my workforce plays itself out over that time period. I throw that date out as well as nothing more than a compromise between those, that December 1 and January 2.
Great. I can support that. Do we have any other comments? Commissioner O'Halloran, welcome. We are talking Connect Oregon. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. I thought
please-
you'd be much later, so you're
Please
actually
forgive
early.
my late arrival, and obviously this issue is one that has a big price tag, right? And I think the legislators have strong point of view on it, but at the same time, we have an obligation to make sure that we are being diligent stewards of these resources. And I think from a business standpoint, one, does it really have to be, do they have to have some onus that this is a viable business plan? And two, it being intermodal, does it require all the modes to kind of be on board? Or are we just looking at, hey, here's a plan for an intermodal facility, but if the intent is to take trucks off the road, where are the railroads in terms of their commitment or their, what's their role in this, and do they need to be bought in for this to be viable? And if they're not, it seems like it doesn't work. So it's more of a comment and maybe a question that you can respond to, but anyway.
So Commissioner O'Halloran, we do have language in here that requires at the time of the plan that there's a commitment by the appropriate rail entity to be on board with the project. And suggesting that we add language in the pre-proposal that they're at least interested in having the conversation. So you wouldn't necessarily, in the pre-proposal, that's due December 15th, just arbitrarily picking that date now, then we would want at least to see that perhaps they have a letter of their conversations with the railroad type of thing. I don't think they'd be able to commit at that point in time, but just that they're in discussion.
Yeah, and thank you. And so is it also if we build it, they will come in terms of the customer base that needs to sustain it? Because I have to think that if there were sufficient business volume, this would be done with private funds, right? So what's the element of risk here for us? Does there have to be some, what's the element of commitment that there's going to be traffic, cargo volume moving through this?
So on page 6 right now of the interim rules, they talk about a feasibility analysis. What's the assessment of commodities and products likely to be served? What's the anticipated market area? What's the anticipated market share? What's the anticipated transportation cost
I got it.
savings?
So it's all there, and I apologize if you went over this prior to my arrival.
No,
so
it's
thank-
good to make sure that you understand what's there and can support it.
I think you're echoing the comments. We want to make sure on the record that we have certain, this return to Oregon matters. And we want to make sure that we have good projects, not that we just have opportunity, but that we actually have viability going forward as well. So your comments are very well taken. Okay, Commissioner, please.
With all due respect to the director, I have some concern about moving back to December 15th, just particularly if it means the rest of the timeline is going to get moved back a month and a half in terms of getting all the reviews done. I am a little skeptical that, while you, Matt, are skeptical that anything will get done by the project proposers between December 15 and January 2nd, I'm a little concerned about our staff being able to do very much in that time frame too. And if it does mean they somehow have to, because we moved the whole timeline back a month and a half from what's shown on this slide, then I think we're getting into a tight time frame. You're a better judge of that than I am, but I do worry about that, and it seems safer to say January 2nd to me.
And I certainly will respect that, and you have the vote and I don't, and please believe me, I understand that. Make no mistake, we'll do the job on our part to ensure what comes to you in terms of a fully vetted pre-proposal is as informed, and the rigor will be significant. So that's what I commit to you, no matter what the time frame is. Let's just put it that way.
I think we may be splitting hairs. It's not lost on me that if folks haven't had a conversation yet, it's probably a little late to have the conversation about the what if. So I feel comfortable with December 15th. I think it's really shows that we are supportive of moving forward and being as expedient as we can within the confines of the work that's laid out. A lot of deliverables, we stand ready as an agency, so unless December 15th is completely off the table, I hear the hesitation, but I want to give direction and in terms of being able to move forward. So are we, is December 15th comfortable, or would we like, or actually, we could actually, if someone wants to make a motion, that's fine as well. And I think we are all, whatever works. Do you want a paper, rock, scissors? I mean, it's one of those where it's
We just need a date
I
to
know.
put in so you guys can see it at 4 o'clock, so.
do you want to, let's put it in with December 15th.
Okay.
And I will just respect whatever decision the commission wants to move forward with, but let's have a conversation with, when it comes back, please.
But just, can we clarify, does that also mean moving this back 6 weeks, this whole thing? Given that we're talking about some adjustments to this anyway, but.
I think really what it means is that we have to put language into how long we're going to take to review something so that we're timely with regards to that. So this was really just to represent that we have a drop dead of January 1. There's a lot of flexibility, which is really at the onus of the project sponsor, what happens between December 15th and January 1. Mm-hmm. If Mr. Mannix is correct and they can get their plan done in 60 days, then we will start the review process at the 61-day clock. If it takes them a year, then we'll start the review process 1 year and 1 day. So that middle part between December 15th and January 1 is really at the clock is really on the sponsor's part.
Okay, I just want to be sure we don't end up with having trouble getting our project review team together and getting their work done. We're going to be dealing with lots of people's schedules.
Right. I'm not too worried about that, Commissioner.
Okay.
Okay, so please bring back amended language for us.
December 15th, community support, for sort of being really clear that January is around ready to construct. And then the permanent rule will be more around being clear on return on investment, that will have environmental acknowledged, and then a timeline for review. So those two will be split, and then a commitment to come at the latest, the March OTC with the permanent rule.
Please.
And I just wanted to second, to the degree, I didn't elaborate, but Mr. Mannix had identified it more from a statewide impact, as the local municipalities and local public agencies will probably be more engaged on the local community standpoint. But if there's going to be freight traffic and whatnot, other forms that are moving in and out of the state as a result of this, then it would be more of a statewide impact.
Okay.
Other comments, please?
So, Madam Chair, I think with that direction, if there is concurrence from the commission, if I could ask to defer action right now, so my professionals here can go back, bake that into the language right now, but also along with my counsel. Just make sure as we change things, and I don't see anything that if we push here, something spurts out on the other side. But I want to do that one final review, and if we can do that and then bring it back for a vote, my confidence rises just that we haven't missed anything as we tweaked a couple of these things. Fair enough?
And that's today?
Correct.
Okay, yes.
We're
And we
first and
did give-
last.
Yes, so we did give a heads up that that may be happening. So if you could distill all of that down, add language on the environmental if you feel that that's necessary, and then just bring that back. And I didn't see Bonnie's blood pressure go up too much. I saw her,
But
okay.
I think
so-
on the environmental, we'll do that as permanent rule,
Excellent.
so.
Okay, we will take that under advisement when it comes back, so thank you very much. All right, like I heard at Turtles, we are a little behind here, but I think we can catch up. So now we're going to accept the report on the streamlining of Connect Oregon application submission process, which is slightly odd because we don't really have a process this year outside of the one that we just discussed. But please, Mr. Tornoy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Boehne. Again, Scott Turnoy, Freight Planning Program Manager with ODOT. In House Bill 2017, Section 85, if I'm not mistaken, there was a requirement for the department to develop, actually the commission to submit a report to the Joint Transportation Committee explaining methods that the agency was pursuing to streamline the Connect Oregon application process. And we've done that. We've drafted the report. It was submitted to you in the commission's meeting packet for today. In preparing the report, we did reach out to a number of past applicants in terms of phone interviews and a informal survey. And we heard back common themes of ways that folks had challenges with the past application process and the technology we used in order to have folks submit the applications. And so what we have in the report is a summary of that outreach process, the results of what stakeholders responded to us with suggestions, and we have a set of next steps basically to look at an online application form that will allow us to streamline the number of questions that each applicant, given the mode that they're applying for, would see. So it would take less time potentially to fill out the application. The online form would be a much easier process for submitting the application files and any attachments or letters of support and what have you. So we feel that this is actually we've subscribed to an online forms service already. So we're prepared in the event that we do have funding in the next biennium or so to have a competitive grant process. And it's a leverage point that we can use for other grant programs throughout the agency. We can tailor the application forms in a number of different ways. So we feel confident that this could, in just this one step, among others, address a lot of the challenges that folks have had in the past. So basically the action we request of you today is to accept the report that's been drafted and authorize the commission or Chair Boehne to submit the report to the Joint Transportation Committee at such time that they're active and able to receive the report.
Have any questions or comments? Okay, I would welcome a motion.
Madam Chair, I think these are thoughtful revisions and meaningful ones. And so with that, I move to approve, or move that we accept this report and support submittal of it to the Joint Committee on Transportation.
Excellent.
One quick comment.
Please.
And I too appreciate this. I think one of the things that, and maybe I'm missing something again, but as we look at our review times, we probably should enter that into this report so that we show that we are up in our game and have deadlines on the review process. So the next round, as we continue to look at this, just what are our review times? How are we helping to streamline that? So it's not, the onus isn't just on the applicant, it's on us as well. Thank you.
I like that. Okay, other comments? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you later this afternoon. Next item on the agenda, we have a request to approve the amendments within the 2018-21 STIP program by adding the list of project funded by the wonderful House Bill 2017. Mr. Mather, great to see you.
Good to see you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Paul Mather, Highway Division Administrator, back again. If you remember, I was in front of you last month in Enterprise and walked you through the amendment that we're proposing. We allowed the amendment to be out there for public comment. We have only received one comment without any substantive issues that was raised in that comment. We have made one slight technical correction that staff found in the amendment, but other than that, it's the same amendment that you saw in front of you last month. I'll remind you also just briefly, some of the comments that I made last time, that this amendment is really a composition of about 3 different things that we're doing here with one amendment. So with House Bill 2017, there's obviously additional funds for bridge pavements and the various money that's raised in Section 71 of the bill. So those projects for the next STIP cycle, 1821, are in here. We were fortunate that coming out of the development of the 1821 STIP, we had fresh data available to us in development of a 150% list in the various programs that we were easily able to put those projects together and put that into this amendment. The other piece in this amendment are the quote name projects that are in here. So the ones consistent with the direction you heard from Leah this morning with the leadership from the committee and the timelines. Those name projects are put in here in the years consistent with that direction that we got from leadership. I will note in one of the pieces of confusion I've had to clarify a couple times with the amendment, the second section of this amendment outlines the quote local projects. Those local projects include funding for rest areas and some of the other name projects in the bill that goes to local governments. Those technically will not go into the STIP. Those are just in here to be comprehensive in all the projects. We'll do those activities through agreement. So either agreement with TIC or agreement with those local communities. They won't be formally adopted into the STIP, but just be comprehensive in all the pieces that we're putting together. The last piece that's integrated into this are the funds in 1821. Make sure I got my right STIP. I think that's right. The money that was the commission set aside about $74 million. 49 of it was for freight projects that were not identified, and then $25 million of strategic contingency funds. Those were used in crafting House Bill 2017, and those funds are committed through this amendment, either through those named projects or through the other projects in here. So by your action in approving this, you will commit those $74 million that were left uncommitted out of the FAST Act from the federal funds. Again, just the final point, just the urgency of this for us. The bill takes effect in October. We start collecting money in January. There's high expectations with this bill, expectations by contractors and the public that we hit the ground running this next construction season. So the urgency for me is to get these projects identified and we can get our project delivery workforce geared up so we can meet those expectations this coming construction season and those more complex projects for 19 and 20 and so forth, that we can begin our planning and design development of these projects and have them hit the ground. So with that, Madam Chair, those are my comments, and I ask for your approval of the amendment.
Would you mind going over just briefly, I think I've heard some, and I know that the benefit cost is over 15 million on the projects that we go forward with, but not the ones that are earmarked, and that's not a number of them anyway. But there is a process in which we use that actually we make sure that we are getting the best projects for the community and the greatest benefit and return on that. Do you mind just kind of putting on the record a little bit of what we use as a lens and a filter? I think that'd be beneficial.
Yeah. So Madam Chair, I think so we do have systems that I've described to you in a number of presentations about our various management systems for our various programs to make sure that say in the bridge program that we're using the funds that we have with the maximum benefit to the bridge. So sometimes that could be a repair on a bridge, sometimes it could be replacement, some kind of a painting project, so forth. in our various management systems. I guess in your comments to me, you mentioned the community. I would say in the Fix-It program, it's not really designed necessarily with the community in mind. It's more of the asset in mind, that we're trying to be good stewards of the funds that we do have and making sure that we're taking care of the particular asset, whether it's pavements, bridges, culverts, and so forth. So we do have those disciplines that are in place for each of those programs, and I'm confident with the projects that we have in here that they are money that is going to advance the condition level of our bridges if we did not have, or all our assets if we did not have these funds.
And I think what I'd like for us to really, I think maybe it's in terms of the benefit to community, that piece of, as we have added investments and the opportunity for us that maybe it's an investment of a bike path alongside an improvement that now adds a different community benefit from a different funding source, that sort of collective piece is happening within community, making sure that the projects are benefiting the community with the greatest impact, both from maybe it's congestion and freight mobility that's happening, and that's also we're getting cyclists off the road by doing something else over here. I know that happens within community, but the more that we can talk about how that works, I think alleviates the concerns about just looking at it as an asset. Instead, it's looking at a benefit and an impact to community.
Yes, Madam Chair, oftentimes we use the word leverage, and we leverage different pieces. And so looking for other advantages of a project that has more than just maybe advancing the condition of the overall asset set. But what does it mean to the community as a new feature, a new bridge, for example, would obviously provide better connection for all modes and not just highways. So we do take those into consideration also. As our regions have been involved in shaping this list. It's not just spit out from a management standpoint or our program managers here in Salem. They work closely with our regional staff, which are in contact with communities and our area commissions as we develop the list.
Thank you. Okay, questions, comments, thoughts? All right, I'd welcome a motion.
Madam Chair, I move to approve an amendment to the 2018-21 STIP by adding the list of projects shown in, funded by House Bill 2017 and shown in Agenda Item F.
Okay, further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. All right, moving on for an informational presentation about the condition of the system. And Mr. Mather, will you, there's Mr. Brower and Ms. Bohart. All right, will you be kicking us off, Paul? Okay, Jerry, all righty, great, the floor is yours.
So just in case you don't remember who I am, it's Jerry Bohart, TDD Division Administrator, and I'm going to start off the 21-24. Can I have a flipper? Yep. Thank you. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to set the stage. Paul Mather will be having the bulk of the conversation, walking through the fix-it portion of the STIP and really how it impacts the condition of the system. And then Mr. Brower is going to set the stage for what we envision will be the scenario process. And again, this will be one of the key areas that we're going to be looking for your feedback. So I know you've seen these questions again and again. But they really do set the framework for the input that we're looking for from you. And as I said, as we start to work on the scenarios, becomes even that much more important.
Jerry, at the end, let us know what it is that you will be seeking from us today so that we are clear as we're listening to the presentation. It can be concise at the end.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Did you hear that, Mr. Brower? So we got to get rid of this animation on this slide. So here we are in September. I think we had a great conversation, I thought, when we were out in Region 5 around the non-highway and the local programs. So you got a sense of what those programs are and where we might be looking for some additional funds. Here we are in September. And then in October, as you all may be aware, as part of your workshop, we'll be having the stakeholders to have a conversation around the STIP scenarios. I believe we've gotten an excellent turnout. All of the ACT chairs and our stakeholders will be there. We've also provided, particularly the ACT chairs, with some questions, and I know our region managers and our ACT managers are already having conversations with the ACT so that they'll be prepared for a good discussion in October. So then in November, based on what we hear both in September and October, in November bringing forward a recommended scenario. We do envision that as part of that conversation, there may be tweaks that you want to make, or you may want to hear from a few stakeholders. So I think that we recognize it will probably be December before, in our hopes that you gavel down on the program allocation so that we start the first of the year ready to rock and roll. So this is just a reminder of the different funding categories, particularly the commissioners that have been involved in some of the earlier steps of how we see the 21-24 coming out. We really sort of did the bottom half first, and now we're working on the top half, and that's what Paul's going to be talking about. So, you know, one of the things, and I think in one of the earlier conversations, we talked about the transparency that we wanted to bring to the STIP process. And one of the ways that we saw doing that was to do a STIP survey. And so we really used the same questions, two questions that really come out of the needs and issues survey. So some of you may be aware that we do a needs and issues survey every 2 years. It's done out of my research program. They've been doing it for, I don't know, 20 plus years. A lot of the questions remain the same in order that we can just see some trends. This one question here, I think what's pretty interesting about this is that the methodology in the needs and issues survey, we make sure that it's statistically significant that we get at a minimum 350 completed surveys from each of the regions. In our needs and issues survey, we had a little over 1,900 surveys that were completed as part of that research project. In the STIP survey, when this slide was put together, we had 1,700 people who had finished, you know, answering these two questions. So I bring that up because the numbers look very similar, and you can see sort of just how they responded. There's a lot of relationship between the two of them. We see really in both surveys maintaining the existing roadway. So consistent with our policies, it's all about maintaining our assets. And then agreement with certainly our number one focus as an agency, improving the safety of the roadways. So you can see that show up whether it's a statistical survey or whether it's just the public at large bringing forward their recommendations.
Well, and how so enforcing traffic laws gets into safety, so safety
Sure.
features, but then also the use of the system. It seems that there's a strong
Right.
commitment to making
Right.
sure that those are together.
Right, and then I think to Commissioner Simpson's point earlier, the importance about thinking about our natural resources and our environment ranks very highly as well. And then an interest and support for public transportation. This continues a little bit here, as you can see, regards to reducing congestion, GHG emissions in particular. So that came out really because some of the new legislation that we have. But in our most recent survey, improving roads, probably a bigger jump than what you saw in the STIP survey. So I believe in October perhaps we'll be talking a little bit more about the survey. And if you all have an interest, we do, like I said, have the final report for the needs and issues survey that was, I think, completed just a couple months ago. So with that, to try to set the stage, I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm just going to, as she's kind of teed this up for me, just walk you through our Fix-It program. This will sound very, very familiar to the last probably 6 times I've been up here talking about this topic, and just add a little bit of differences to how House Bill 2017 has shaped our Fix-It program going forward. So here's what our Fix-It program looks like out of the 1821 STIP. This is the pie graph without the amendment that you just approved, just to give you a kind of a sense of scale of where we invest in various programs. Compare that to what it looks like now, since you just adopted the amendment in the previous agenda item. what it looks like. So you can see in both graphs, it's dominated by pavements and bridge, and that's where we put a lot of our resources. It's the major aspect of our asset inventory that we focus on. So I'm just going to walk you through each one of these, and it's started out with a surprise of the order of these. Okay. So I'm going to start with bridge and just kind of walk you through each one of these. This is a graph of the bridge condition, and each one of these slides that I'm going to try to show you is kind of status quo if we did not have additional funding, which will be represented by the red line. The green line will be represented the additional funding from House Bill 2017. And then the investment strategy. Remember, a year ago we were in front of you, or just less than a year ago, of the recommendation that the commission had of where funding levels should be. So just to kind of give you some bookends, to give you some reference points as to kind of how we see our condition levels changing with the significant investment out of House Bill 2017. So this is an overall bridge condition rating. But when we think particularly about bridges, we worry about our freight corridors and our key routes as being the most important, and we focus our investments there. And so you can see in this chart how why we recommend what we did with the investment strategy to keep those key freight routes together. But if you look closely here on the green line with House Bill 2017, and the timeline that we're talking about, this is a fairly large window of time for bridges that we're talking about. The investment in 2017 really keeps us on track with the investment strategy for a number of years, and really doesn't start diverging until the middle 2030s timeframe, which ironically is about the time when our current bond payments for JTA and OTIA bonds, those payments that we're making will become available. Now, we've built into this some assumptions that the bridge money that was part of the OTIA bonds are built into those repayments are built into this, but there would be potentially action to be taken of the rest of those revenues to put towards bridges to maybe have us track closer to that investment strategy line than the investment or the green line. So hopefully you followed everything I just said. So here's actually the slide I wanted to show to begin with. This is the fix-it routes. And so when I was just talking about the key freight corridors that we want to stay focused on, these are those priority routes that we look at. So it's the interstate system. It's the routes that are really consistent between the OTIA 3 bridge program and our seismic conversations. Where do we have high overlap between those two kind of priorities is how we develop the fix-it routes. And so you see we've got 3 major routes to the coast. We have the interstate system, Highway 58 across the Cascades, Mount Hood, and then Highway 20 through central and eastern Oregon. Are really kind of, if we focus down on, these are ones that we pay attention to in all our program areas, not just bridge, that we want to keep as the kind of the final line of defense to keep freight moving in the state.
Mm-hmm. You said, hopefully we understood you, and I'm not sure I did.
Okay, yeah.
What I got out of what you said was that because the bonds are going to start to be paid off, this picture, I mean, it shouldn't be as bad as this portrays. Am I misunderstanding that?
Well, potentially. It's going to take action by either legislative or the commission, but if you assume that all the revenues that are freed up once we pay off the bonds in JTA and OTIA, you would be able to bend that green line on here much closer to the blue line if you took that action. We're not making that I'm not making all of that assumption other than the bridge piece, but we will have that opportunity in that time frame to make that decision.
Okay, good. So at least there's hope.
Yeah. No, I think House Bill 2017, relative to all our investment, gives us a lot of hope, and I think that's the overall message here. While it's not everything we were asking for in the investment strategy, it puts us clearly on a much better path and a much better footing than we had, before the bill. Correct. Right. Right. And I think even as the committee that crafted it acknowledged that this is a 10-year plan that we're trying to keep the system together for 10 years. And so that's exactly what this illustrates. For the next 10 years plus, we're able to keep the system together.
And I think from a long-term perspective, it allows us to leverage as we go forward to even maximize that out further than the 10 years.
Right,
And that's the
right.
piece. It's almost like we're planting a seed today, but that tree can continue to grow depending on how we use that. It
Right.
is a good opportunity.
Whoops, I'm gonna go the right way here. So this is just kind of backing up to all the bridge needs we have, that 20-year picture looking forward. You can see a lot of dots on there, the yellow and red weight restrictions, just the problem we face. Here's what our current funding will secure in relative to those fix-it routes. These are slides you've seen me talk about before. And now with House Bill 2017, these are the routes that will be able to secure it in that 20-year timeframe. So I'm going to shift to seismic, and House Bill 2017, I think, really helped bring into focus for me just our path forward with how we're going to approach seismic. So this is our kind of guiding document of our seismic strategy that we've been talking about for a number of years, and I think it's still that guiding document, but House Bill 2017 really brings some things into focus here. So on the slide, you'll see our 4 different phases of how we kind of phase in or approach implementing our seismic strategy. Phase 5 isn't shown on here, but it is the major coastal bridges essentially would be the last step. Previous actions by the commission have funded and secured the bridges on Highway 97 and 58, so those are shaded that you see on here. So this was kind of the state of things heading into our discussions with House Bill 2017 and kind of our approach. Coming out of it, here's how I would describe it. If you look towards those bridge funds, part of what you just added in the previous amendment, that we, over about a 20 or 30-year time period, we will be able to secure all that phase 1 route. So we would be able to essentially, of our 5-stage plan, we'd be able to check off the first phase of that. The bill also funded the seismic triage for Southern Oregon, so it, in that time frame, provides a route, maybe not the best route, but a route for Southern Oregon. And some redundancy to that in that it provides a connection with 140 over to 97, as well as all of I-5. I think that really, to me, gave us a pathway. So what do we do with stages 2 through 4? I think that triage approach really shows how we can approach the balance of those phases 2 through 4. Again, as you've heard me talk about before, we have a process underway with local governments, cities and counties in Western Oregon, excuse me, to really take a look at this triage approach and how can we apply what we've learned there in the Southern Oregon triage to all those remaining routes and find ways in a very cost-effective, and while may not, again, be the best route, but we'd have a route in each of those corridors that we'd be able to serve the communities until we were able to get to the full phase. So that is a process that's well underway. We've completed work in Lane County and Tillamook County. We're on the cusp of kicking off another handful of counties. And eventually, as we move through those in the next couple of years, we'll be able to kind of stitch together a plan from that work to be able to provide this triage approach excuse me, to the balance of the system. Also in here are our maintenance stations in that kind of coastal forward supply type of approach that I've talked about before. You'll see me come back and ask to use some of those seismic funds identified in the House bill to secure a couple of our maintenance stations. Newport and Coos Bay are ones we have active conversations ongoing. I'll be back in a few months looking for providing some funding there that not only provides a good maintenance station for us, but also puts some of those supplies needed to put the system back together out in those communities. So we're positioned ourselves to get the road back together. Thank you very much. So that's seismic. Turning to pavements, again, this one's a little more straightforward in that there are investment strategies. That blue line, you got to kind of invert your thinking a little bit, what I talked about with bridges. So in this graph, down is bad, up is good. So in our investment strategy, we were proposed to basically keep our pavement conditions where they are today. The status quo, you see a significant decrease in our pavement conditions over the next 15 years. House Bill 2017 takes a similar approach to what we saw in the bridge and keeps us closer to that investment strategy, or above, really what I look for, above that 80% line. That's where we is kind of the break point for me, and I'm trying to keep those funding levels above there. Turning to culverts, again, we're still developing this system to kind of at the same level our bridge and pavement systems are. We're still in a data collection mode and really understanding, but we know we have on those fix-it routes that I talked about before, we have a number of critical and poor culverts. The funding that was provided in the bill will allow us to address those critical and poor culverts on those routes. In conjunction with bridges and pavements, to have those fix-it routes again be our kind of a backbone of our system. So this is an older version of the slide set than I was expecting. What I want to talk about here was more around shifting of our funding splits. So we have more than in House Bill 2017, we have identified funds for pavements, for bridges, and for culverts. There's a lot of other aspects of our system. The slides, rockfall, ITS, ADA, our maintenance functions. Director Garrett talked at the beginning about how our maintenance forces are out there supporting fires. There's snow and ice and so forth. And also in that letter that Leah referenced this morning, there's a correction or a change that we're recommending with House Bill 2017 to change the funding splits of those so we can be a little more comprehensive in our approach to funding the fix-it side of the equation, and not focus as heavily on bridge and seismic in particular. So I guess I just referenced back to that letter that Leah presented. That's really what I wanted to highlight here was those the change in those funding splits that we're going to be recommending in February to give us a little more latitude to fund some of these other aspects that are important to our system. Safety, we spend about $35 million currently per year in safety. The House Bill 2017 takes $10 million kind of off the top to focus towards safety. So that that will be just on the state side of that equation. They'll follow the ARCH program and address, again, some of our other additional safety needs that we have on our system. Part of what we want to do also when we talk about the funding splits is we want to incorporate safety into some of those funding splits to make sure we have the ability to hit some of those highest safety needs that we have out there. So just in summary, just in my presentation relative to House Bill 2017, when the legislature was crafting House Bill 2017, the assumption was that we would keep funding levels, at least relative to the conditions I just reported to you, those funding levels would remain the same. And so if you make a different decision, for example, in the next STIP, in 21-24 STIP, and reduce significantly the fix-it, that's going to undermine some of the assumptions that were made as the legislature was crafting House Bill 2017. So I think you need to be aware of that as you're making some of these decisions. There's a reporting requirement also in House Bill 2017 that requires us to report on how we use the fund, and so if you make changes, that'll become evident as we do the reporting back to the legislature if you make changes. House Bill 2017 also did not have specific enhanced funds, but remember there's a number of projects in those named projects that I just had in the previous agenda item. We also have the 1 cent dedicated to the Rose Quarter that's in the House bill. There are actually a lot of enhancement elements in House Bill 2017, even though they didn't provide an ongoing funding such as they did for Fix-It for enhancement. There are a number of Fix-It projects and funding for Fix-It, and Travis will get into that a little bit in the next slide. But I think to acknowledge that tension between Fix-It and Enhance that I think we're going to struggle with when we put the next step structure together. I just wanted you to have kind of the context of relative to Fix-It, these three pieces, that there was an assumption going in from a condition level standpoint, there's a reporting requirement, and then there are a significant amount of enhanced funds in the House bill.
Questions before we transition? All righty, go right ahead.
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, for the record, I'm Travis Brower, the assistant director, and I'm going to walk you through the Enhanced Highway Program, the last of the categories that we need to cover with you. And I'm going to pause in a couple of places and ask you for some specific feedback that will help us then as we look to build some scenarios to bring you next month. So I'll be very explicit about what those are and let you weigh in at that point. So consistent with the Oregon Transportation Plan, our general policy direction, the commission heavily weighted Fix-It programs when it built the 2018 to 2021 STIP. The commission did allocate $124 million for enhanced highway programs last time around, however. There were two major categories there. One was what we call the State Highway Leverage Funds. This was a category that was intended to make maximum use of limited resources. So it allowed our regions to work with their area commissions on transportation and select enhance elements to add to Fix-It projects when we were going through and had an opportunity to do things more efficiently. For example, in Region 1, they were able to use some existing interstate maintenance projects and add in auxiliary lanes that will help traffic. And you've already added those into the STIP. The other category that was included in the STIP was the freight funding. This was a category, the National Highway Freight Program, that was created by Congress after you'd adopted the initial funding allocations. So we added it in as a separate category. And in the amendment you did today to the 1821 STIP, you allocated those funds. So those were the two major categories within that $124 million that was made available for enhanced highway activities. As Paul mentioned, though, the legislation, HB 2017, added more than $600 million in enhanced projects that were specifically named in the bill in both the 1821 and the 21 to 24 STIPs. So there's already a base of funding in the STIP, primarily for the Rose Quarter in the 21 to 24 STIP. Regardless of what discretionary funds you put in there, there's already a significant amount of funding already put into the STIP for that work to enhance highways. So we are wanting today to get some feedback from you about the enhanced highway funds and how that should be structured in the STIP and how much there should be in there. We're assuming that these enhanced highway funds will be for the state system only. That's been our traditional practice in most of the STIPs, and it's in accordance with the 50% increase in funding going to local governments under HB 2017. What we'd like to do is get your feedback so that we can make a proposal to you on the program structure of how we should do this. There's two basic options for how you could structure the enhanced highway program in the next STIP. One is to essentially put it all in one pot of money and hand it to the ACTs through that regional allocation process that we do, and then allow them to select the highest priority projects. That's always a very good way to engage our stakeholders. It ensures that regional priorities bubble up to the top, but it may not have that quite as much opportunity to leverage funds with existing Fix-It projects, and it also may not be quite as strategic in meeting some of the statewide freight needs that really you look at from more of a statewide perspective per the new freight plan amendment. The other opportunity is, or option is really kind of like what you did last time around in 18 to 21, which is to create some targeted categories based on whatever needs may be available. Last time you did the state highway leverage funds and the freight funds. We could do those similar categories or some other opportunity. We talked to our area, or our region managers about this to get their sense, because Chair Boehne had asked that we do that. And what they would really like to see is a program set up that allows them to add, enhance, and safety elements to fix-it projects, so that when we are going through a community and we know that there is a need to make enhancements to the highway that are beyond just the straight pave or bridge repair, that we can do that. So I'll reference the city of Monmouth. The mayor of Monmouth, who recently retired, John Oberst, was a member of our transportation policy group and deeply involved with the League of Oregon Cities. He, I remember regularly, was coming up to me saying, you know what, you're going through Monmouth, you're doing a paving project, and because of your practical design disciplines, all you're doing is paving. But I need a left turn pocket. I really need, there's a safety issue at the north end of town. We need to be able to have people be able to safely cross and safely turn. What can we do? And unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of opportunity with that. So what the region managers is to be able to be responsive to those community needs and to be able to meet those goals for that need for the system. So what I'd like to do is pause and then give you the opportunity to provide feedback on what direction you might want to see us bring you back next month in different scenarios. That can either be telling us exactly what we need to do or just ask us for some options for how you might structure this, and then have that conversation with the area commissions on transportation and other stakeholders next month.
Well, let me start by saying that the latter that you just mentioned in terms of that particular example is exactly what I would like to see happen. That just sounds like good governance in terms of making sure that we're getting the right projects for the best community benefit without having to go back 2 or 3 times, because we know that those safety improvements need to happen. I think it also offers us the opportunity to partner with our local, whether it's a city or a county, and leverage those dollars as well, because the packages, those are tax dollars of all Oregonians. And so how do we leverage that within community for the greatest return and benefit to the community? So that's...
Chair Boehne, and I should add, thank you for adding the word partnership, because that was another key word that the region managers threw on the table as well, was they want those opportunities with local governments having this infusion of money. They're looking for partnership opportunities, and having that sort of funding available would give us that opportunity.
Excellent. So other comments on direction or thoughts? Please. Oh, Commissioner Brown?
He was first. I'll defer to my
No, go
colleague.
ahead.
Well, just in discussions and what I'm hearing, and also to ask you what you all are hearing, that whole ability to leverage, partner, have local control is always an ACT desire, I know. And the more that they can have their priorities heard, they understand the priorities, we have to build in a trust in that prioritization. You know, I know that that's an issue. Paul, you mentioned there's no enhanced funds identified, but aren't there triggers as we go along that those enhanced funds actually are shown later on, after all the named projects are completed? Or is it not specifically identified as enhanced? I think at that
Commissioner
point,
Brown, there's not a standalone ongoing funding source for enhanced identified in the bill. There, in earlier versions of the bill, they contemplated different versions of that, but at the end, the only ongoing funding source, I don't know if they're the only, but Fix-It has an ongoing funding source where Enhanced doesn't. Enhanced has identified projects, as Travis said, $600 plus million. But that's it.
but that's the current,
That's
the current named projects.
That's just in House Bill 2017,
Okay.
correct?
But I think that what I hear is the more local control that the acts can have, that the regions can influence, I think is appropriate. And I'd like to continue to look at that. I think the there are enhanced leverage capabilities, because like you said, you don't want to just pave. We have all the ADA requirements and all these other things that are included in there as well.
I want to be sure I understand how this would work. And I don't want to be speaking against the interests of my city, but they're already getting 20% of the funds. And if what we're, and I want to say, I have a lot of faith in the acts to make good judgments. But I also want to make sure we aren't saying, not only do you get your 20% or 30% if it's a county, but you also get a, I don't know how to phrase this, but get a crack at at some of the statewide money that might also be necessary for the statewide system. They might be nice to be able to spend in your community, but if we have to do that at the expense of the statewide system, then I worry a little bit. So I guess I'm looking for, maybe I'm off balance in my analysis.
No, Commissioner
but I'm
Lohman, I
looking
think you raise a good point, but I think that's probably the next kind of layer of specificity we get to when we set criteria and expectations for the acts of how they would do it. I think for now, we're just thinking the general thought of having some money that we could attach to our fix-it projects, like Travis illustrated with the left turn lane or other safety feature embedded into a bridge or a pavement project. So my thinking anyway would be we'd want to keep it on the state system with the state projects, that these wouldn't be necessarily benefit, but the partnerships could be where you have an intersection where the city is developing or the county is developing their legs of the intersection, and we'd be able to develop our legs of the intersection to match into their funding and create a more whole project.
So it's more a
around something.
coordination
Yes.
issue in a way.
Yeah. But again, I think the concerns you have, I think we would address in specific expectations or criteria we set before we give instructions to the acts.
And kind of like we have done with Connect Oregon, we would be making sure that the regional managers would have an opportunity, and it's not just a unilateral decision by the acts, it's the region manager saying, here, we got so much money to spend and we've got these needs, let's figure out together how to maximize the joint funding that we have.
Correct. And again, you can set those expectations when you set the stage, that you expect the region managers and the region staff to be engaged in these projects, and you expect the acts to be engaged and find those partnerships. That kind of expectation can be set before we.
And Madam Chair, if I may, you are the final arbiter. So there is many sets of eyes that will vet this to ensure that the investment brings benefit. We've often cited the opportunity where an off-system investment can indeed benefit the system. And I think that's the discipline that the acts and the region managers can actually identify. And Paul certainly identified a specific example of kind of a multi-owned intersection that plays itself out.
So devil in the details, but this, I think, gives you direction on where we are inclined to move, and then come back to us with a bit more of the language of what that would look like, to make sure that it isn't just an open checkbook for whatever system is in need. Other comments, or please, Commissioner?
We talked about this a little bit last month, and I think Commissioner Brown was highlighting it a lot, and I was curious as to, it may not be relative, but I'm curious, how does innovation and technology play into these scenarios as well? Well, I mean, there's this other category, which obviously I don't know entirely what that means, but how does it kind of overlap and tie into these various different options here?
Commissioner Simpson, we can incorporate innovation in this in a variety of different ways. In the past, there have been times that we've incorporated innovation as a separate category, that there is literally an opportunity to apply for innovative projects. What we've typically done, though, more effectively, is build innovation in as a criteria in various programs, so that innovative projects get more points, so that all things being equal, if you've got a project that brings in innovation, it scores better. So that it could be a consideration that we could get from the commission to build that into whatever funding program we develop out of this, or across the STIP even.
But those elements primarily would be ideally more housed in more of an enhanced approach, right? I would assume.
Commissioner Simpson, that was something I think we were talking about last month in terms of the non-highway projects and what opportunities for innovation might exist on the, the transit and bicycle and pedestrian type projects. It's something we can build into an enhanced highway program as well. For example, we did at one point a number of years ago when there was very limited funding, we did an innovative operations program that looked at what opportunities for intelligent transportation systems could we build on the state highway system. And so that could be an element of a program like this that, given relatively limited resources, how can we most effectively invest those resources to make the transportation system work effectively? And we believe that the experience we've had, particularly in the Portland metro region, is that some of those investments pay off quite well. You see on the right-hand slide there, or side of the slide, you have one of our congestion ahead signs. Those provide an opportunity for people to slow down and then not run into the people in front of them, and thus they make the system more safe and smooth out the traffic flow. So those are the sort of considerations we can build into any program here.
I think that's a great point, because it is the course of doing business in today's world of technology. I think highlighting the ways in which we're elevating that will serve the public well in terms of transparency and accountability of what it is that we're doing with the system, not just adding, but we're maximizing and squeezing as much capacity out of it as we can, both from a safety and a mobility perspective.
Good.
So other comments? All right, go ahead.
Thank you. That was
Second?
incredibly helpful. That was exactly the sort of feedback we needed from the commission. So that will give us the ability to bring forward a program structure for the enhanced highway side of things. Now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the funding scenarios writ large, not just for enhance or for the fix-it side, but for the entirety of the STIP. Right at the moment, we're currently working through those funding scenarios to determine how much money is available. We already have that for the federal side based on the assumptions that the commission gave us early in this process that are consistent with how we do things, of assuming a reduction in federal funding when there is no Surface Transportation Authorization Act in effect. And we're currently working through those numbers from HB 2017. The challenge with HB 2017 is not all of that additional $250 million that will come to us goes into the STIP. Some of it goes into maintenance and operations programs and various things. So we're currently running those numbers. We're getting pretty close. What we hope then is we can then take that federal money, add in the state money, and have an aggregate total that we can then use for developing in-depth scenarios that allow you to weigh in on those. And then next month we'll allow the area commissions on transportation, the modal advisory committees, and the MPO representatives who will be around the table to weigh in on those scenarios. What we'd like to propose to you today is presenting two base scenarios that differ slightly, and we want your feedback on this. So once I give you sort of a sense of what we're looking at, we'd love to get your feedback on what you'd like us to bring back next month. So the first we would call the base case. It is based on the discussion we've had with you to date. So you'll recall last month we talked about the local government programs and how we would base a scenario on the current funding levels, which are set by Congress and by agreement with the AOC and LOC, the cities and counties, as well as providing a small targeted funding increase for the TGM program since it's been flat for a long time. We would also then, as we discussed last month, include a non-highway funding based on the required amounts that we have to put in through federal and state law. And then we would include the enhanced funding based on the previous STIP, the $124 million or thereabouts that I laid out you included in the 2018 to 21 STIP, and safety and other based on the current funding levels for those as well. And safety is based on the amount the federal government gives us for that program, as well as the $10 million in additional funding from HB 2017. Essentially, that would leave the remainder available for fix-it programs. That would be consistent with the amount that was provided in the 2018 to 2021 STIP, and then with the additional policy direction from the legislature, which allocated all of the additional HB 2017 money into those fix-it and safety programs. So that was what we would consider the base case, where essentially the commission chooses to go forward based on the existing policy direction from the legislature and the existing policy that you set in the 2018 to 2021 STIP, as well as the input from Congress based on the formulas that they set in law. The alternative to that we would propose to you is I guess what I would call increased enhance scenario that would look to put more money into enhanced highway and perhaps into the non-highway side in order to provide additional mobility options. That inherently comes at the expense of the Fix-It program, however, given that that is by far the largest category in this STIP. So that would have some impacts on our ability to maintain the state of good repair of the system, and we would have to talk you through what those trade-offs are. We are not proposing this, but we could also show you a scenario that reduces enhanced highway funding, given that the legislature already put several $100 million into that program in HB 2017 through the named projects. But what we would propose to you, and then get your feedback now, would be presenting that base case scenario and then another scenario that provides for increased enhance and non-highway funding, and then walking you through what the trade-offs are in terms of Fix-It and the ability to maintain the system. So I'll pause now and allow you to provide your feedback on that.
Thoughts or comments? Please.
Is scenario 1 a reduction in current enhanced levels?
Commissioner O'Halloran, it would be designed to be based on the existing enhanced funding level.
Thank you.
So none of those would be in any way a reduction. They'd be carrying forward those funding levels from the 2018 to 21 STIP, or in this 28-21 STIP.
Commissioner Brown?
So I don't know how to say this without sounding negative, but this doesn't tell me anything. You say, well, we can bring you this or this, but you're not saying based on anything. So I guess it's hard for me to say, yeah, go do something, but yeah, go do something. I guess I want to see really what does this mean? What would it look like? How would it help our small cities? How would it help to balance out that need? You can't talk. So how would we really, how would this make it better? And without telling me how it's going to be better, I can't react to this. So you talk about it would give us mobility options, but what does that mean? Anyway, I would love to be more positive, but how does this help our local guys?
Yeah. And Commissioner Brown, the goal today is to get the sort of the policy general conceptual direction from you so that we can come back next month with more specifics around that. So that you can sort of weigh the trade-offs. But today, we literally do not have the numbers that we could do that for you because we are still in the process of calculating those based on HB 2017.
But Trav, is it fair to say, to the commissioner's point, we've spoken about one side of the ledger. There's an investment level that plays itself out in scenario 1 and 2, and we'll come up with those numbers. But then there is an outcome of that investment, and that's, again, to I think, the description that you want. Well, what does this mean to the condition of the system? Okay, we know if status quo holds where we are, have we increased it? Is there a deficit? So that condition of the system, rippling through both the state system as well as the implication or what cascades down into local government and the local system as well. That comes with, again, with the other side of the ledger of this type of conversation. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah,
And does that
Director
help?
Garrett.
And that actually, I think, completes the formula that you're looking for.
I guess really what I'm looking for is we've heard from the constituent base through the acts, through all of our outreach to all the different communities and what the governor has done as well, that says fix what you have. I mean, we've heard that loud and clear, and that's been the mantra, the message. Barring coming back with me, to me or to us saying, well, wait a second, you really need to do more of this. That condition assessment, what is it going to help? We know we're going to spend significant funding on enhanced projects as outlined by House Bill 2017. We know that. I mean, it's dictated. like it or not, in some cases. But what we don't know is spending that amount of money on those particular projects, what does it do to the rest of the state? What are we missing in eastern Oregon? What are we missing in southeast Oregon? What should we be doing for some of these other projects that we haven't looked at yet? And I think I don't have enough information here to say, yep, go this way.
Yeah.
I do know that we've heard for a long time, fix-it's been important. Have we done what we said we were gonna do and we have now money to move around? I haven't heard that yet. So barring hearing something new, it's hard to move off of that.
I think that's probably the exact direction that's beneficial today. So
That's what we need to
what we
hear.
haven't had the benefit for Commissioner Brown is having gone through the scenarios that you then populate with this sort of vague, it feels, direction. The team's done a great job in bringing back, if you were, and I think we landed last time around 87% of the spend was around the fix-it. You had given us scenarios of what if it's 75? What if it's in here's, it's almost like a menu in terms of if you go, like levers, if you go one direction, here's what you end up doing to the system, or here's where you end up impacting. And we did hear last time, we have more funding, let's go forward with more enhance. Well, here's the lever of what that means on the fix-it side. So I think if it's my understanding is correct, that that's what you plan to do next, is to populate those scenarios and then walk us through what that looks like so that we can then make an informed decision of unintended consequences and benefits of our decisions. Please.
Madam Chair, so I'm able to look at the two charts together. It's not an either or, because you've increased the non-highway portion also, you've increased safety also. I mean, we have the ability to change the dial a little bit. It's not, I mean, we can modulate, kind of how we do it. It's not like, okay, this all enhanced, because that's not, so non-highway's gone up and it's all coming at the expense on fix-it. I think we don't have to do dramatic swings. We can do slight swings to these, and I think that's what we ought to be doing, and weighing off the cost benefits. There's going to be a subjective call that we're going to have to make at some point. I think there's an objective aspect to what projects will get done and which ones won't, but I don't think it's just scenario one or scenario two. It is, we can adjust the dial to do slightly more enhance and maybe, slightly more safety and maybe not as much on non-highway. I mean, we can tweak it. So I know we have, it's not just option one or option two. There's a menu among them.
I'm curious, if I understand correctly, these two graphs really don't show any portion of the $600 million that was for new enhanced projects that are in 2017. So if you, and of course, that's over a longer period of time, I think. So, but if somehow we were to crank in to those projects as well, our enhanced bar would be a lot wider.
Yeah. Commissioner Lohman, that's correct. Typically, what we show you in the STIP is the funds that the commission really has full discretion over. So, for example, we don't, even though it's included in the STIP allocation process, we don't include the Federal Transit Administration money that comes directly to ODOT as strictly a pass-through, because that's not really commission discretion as to whether you put it into public transportation. If we were to show the enhanced highway funds for the named projects, that enhanced bar would get a lot wider than it is today.
So, the question, would it be helpful for you when we come back with our scenarios to show that? Because you'd show it for Fix-It and Safety and the other programs too. We could show it in a lighter color of the same color type thing, so you get a truer sense, like I did in those pie charts in the beginning for Fix-It, something like that. You could see kind of the difference of what the total STIP would actually end up looking like. Then you can see your piece that you have kind of discretion over of how you wanted to make this. But would that be helpful?
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's confusing otherwise,
Okay.
because your prep for us and overview included it in a way, showing kind of
Right.
those pieces. I think it's it could be confusing if it's not considered part of it.
But I will say, without having seen that yet,
Yeah.
I continue to think the fix-it side is very important, especially since we are doing some real things on the enhancement side. And I think we have no choice but to do a much better job with, mostly it's non-highway. It's what I'm thinking of is basically the non-single occupant vehicles. We have to figure out ways to do that much better. So just speaking in these vague general terms, I like this scenario 2 better than scenario 1 because it does increase the fix-it and it does increase the non-highway. But, as Commissioner O'Halloran says, we want to see the details and move those dials some, of course, but I think just going in without full information, that's kind of where I would tend to go.
And I would just say we would want that same information, not just for enhanced, but for what has been allocated in the other segments.
right.
And maybe some clarity on what other is. Is that culverts? Is it, what is it? What does other mean? Commissioner O'Halloran, other is a catch-all category that, for example, is the State Planning and Research Program. That funds within Jerry's organization doing our planning studies. Oh, so we could reduce that and put it into enhance. It's generally administrative categories, including things that have been directed by the legislature. So it's one we haven't spent a lot of time on. We'll give you the numbers, but it's generally things that are required under federal or state law. And I assume there's also some overlap here, that some of the things we do on safety are enhancements and et cetera, that there's just some overlap. Commissioner O'Halloran, a significant number of projects that come out of our safety program, you might look at and say, hey, that actually looks like an enhanced type project to me, but it is designed with a focus on safety.
And the flip side, almost all our projects have some safety improvement to them, so.
Which is an interesting nuance as we tell the story of where we are investing our dollars. I think if you were just someone from the general public, you would look and say, well, they're really only prioritizing safety in such a small way. So how we connect that as we continue to tell the story of the great work that's being done, I think is critical. Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, and I think just to help me understand better, you've given us bridge conditions, you've given us fix-it route conditions, you've given us pavement conditions, and we have a strategy that even with the incremental additional funding from House Bill 2017, we're not meeting that investment strategy. So if we're not meeting it, why would we change our scenario, even as much as we'd like to? I think we have a strategy and we have it for a reason. And you guys are teaching me to believe in that strategy, so I'm trying to hit that believe button, and we're not making it, even with House Bill 2017. So unless there's a compelling reason to try new cool things, or let's do more of something else, we have a strategy that's there for a reason. And I would be inclined to really look at that. Now, I'm all for trying new things. I like to enhance things. I'd like to do the new cool ideas, but we're still not there. Our baseline system is still not there. That's the engineer in me talking. Thanks.
Okay, other comments? Do you have enough from us?
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, very good.
Okay.
That is
All right.
exactly what we're looking for.
Okay.
I'll just walk you through real quickly the expectation for next month. We will present you more detailed scenarios where we'll be able to give you a little bit more detail, both numbers and how that money will be allocated. We have the ACTs coming in. They'll hear that presentation along with our advisory committees and a representative from the MPOs. And then they and you will be able to provide us feedback on those more specific scenarios. That will allow us to come back to you in November with a draft final scenario, and you can provide us any further feedback. What we would
guess at that point, as Jerry said earlier, that seems like an appropriate time, given some extra time we have in the schedule, to put that out for public comment when you actually have a draft final, and then take any comments, and then in December, most likely, do any final tweaks, and then approve that funding allocation.
Comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much. All right, next we have a discussion and request for approval to begin the rulemaking process to amend in reference to safe routes to school. How about we do that? And Amanda, I'm not sure that we need to do a ton in terms of what safe routes to school, and just we could get to the meat of what it is that you are asking of us today. And we did have some public comment as well, so in case we have other comments, we'll turn to you. Okay.
Great. Thank
Ms.
you.
Beets, great to see you.
Thank you. Jackie, do you have a presentation for? Excellent, thank you. So for the record, Amanda Peets, ODOT Program and Implementation and Analysis Manager. So I'm here today to seek approval of initiating a rulemaking process to implement Safe Routes to School infrastructure funding directed by House Bill 2017. So with your direction, Commissioner Cherubini, I won't spend a lot of time on background, but just to hit the highlights.
It's a great program, and we love it.
So often we think about the infrastructure side of things, so thinking about adding crosswalks, sidewalks, and bike lanes where none exist, rapid flashing beacons that increases visibility of people. So those are some of the infrastructure type projects. There's also education and outreach and awareness efforts for Safe Routes to School that let people know that they can walk or bike, how to do it safely, and other related programs. So just a brief history of Safe Routes to School in Oregon that relates to then the charge of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Oregon Safe Routes to School infrastructure funding and otherwise really started in 2005 in anticipation of federal funding from SafetyLU that dedicated money towards Safe Routes to School. At that time, the Safe Routes to School fund was established and rules were set by the commission to guide operation of those funds. An advisory committee was formed that helped to select projects. In 2012, the dedicated funding went away. When it went away, the program disappeared and the advisory committee was formally dissolved at that time. Leading up to, even though the set-aside dedicated funding went away, you as a commission have made decisions to still invest in the education and outreach side of the house at about $500,000 a year, and that infrastructure funding could still be, and projects could still be eligible under the statewide transportation improvement program. Also, this has been continued to be a priority in the statewide policy documents like the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan and your OTC investment strategy. So really talking about the need to connect biking and walking routes to schools, education and outreach for Safe Routes to School, and also identified in those documents was safe first and last mile connections to public transportation. So when ODOT was asked by the Oregon legislature to come and talk to the subgroup thinking about biking and walking needs, these are really the 3 points that we hit on with the legislature. Ultimately, what they decided in House Bill 2017 was to focus on those safe biking and walking connections to school and roughly about the level of investment called for in the investment strategy. So what that is about $10 million per year through 2022, and then that increases to $15 million a year. That money is then deposited into the Safe Routes to School fund that I mentioned previously. It calls for infrastructure projects that benefit safety with priority around a 1 mile radius of elementary and middle schools. It requires a fairly high match for relative programs. 40% cash match is what's specified in the legislation. That, at your discretion, can be dropped down to a 20% match in areas such as safety corridors, and that can be defined by you. In small communities, those under 5,000, and near Title I schools. And the OTC has authority over the program design and processes.
So is that like a variance process, or is that a per proposal, or we will establish criteria and then that'll be implemented? How do you see that piece?
Right, so the
rolling out? I think that'll
legislation-
be critical.
Great. So the legislation gave the flexibility to the commission to go ahead and grant a lower level reduction. How it does that was left up to the discretion of the commission. So I think that's one thing we can help to identify during the rulemaking process is what are the triggers for those and what might the process be that you want to engage in to lower that match rate. So just in review, House Bill 2017 deposits money into the Safe Routes to School Fund, which is guided by administrative rule. It says ORS up there, but it should say OAR. My apologies. That administrative rule hasn't been touched since 2005. The reason that's important is that in 2005, it was federal dollars flowing into that account. Those federal dollars allowed for projects like bike racks or enforcement activities. Those are not allowable under the state highway fund restrictions, so that's one reason in and of itself to go into the rule and make amendments. So part of why I'm here today is to get your approval over the representation categories on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So a couple key groups that we feel are important include the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee. That group is called in statute as a group that we should consult with in doing the program design. So they're a key member of this group. Because the topic is around biking and walking needs, Oregon Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And then also just the importance of first and last mile connections to public transportation, we recommend that committee on there. From a local jurisdiction perspective, counties and cities are key groups to include here in our discussions thus far with Association of Oregon Cities and Association of Oregon Counties and League of Oregon Cities. Some of the members that we're thinking about include planning manager that has dealt with these types of funds previously, public works director who would be implementing these types of things. So those practitioner and on-the-ground perspectives we recognize as really important. Also, certainly from a school perspective, talking to Oregon Department of Education, they have a pupil transportation expert, so we can think from a statewide perspective about the needs for children getting to schools, but also that local boots on the ground perspective of practitioners that really know the issues around schools and know how best to facilitate safe improvements there. From an advocacy perspective, there is an Oregon Safe Routes to School network, so that's practitioners across the state that get together, so seeking someone from that group, as well as a biking and walking, so somebody like from the Street Trust would be a good example of one of those advocacy organizations. Local law enforcement that also understands safety issues, but from a different perspective, we thought would be helpful. And then also assuring that we consider key goals that are represented on our statewide plans. So mobility and accessibility, particular to walking, is really important. Equity issues and public health, excuse me. And public health is really an important component for Safe Routes to School in general. Since the formation of the federal program, those really have been intertwined as that transportation health. That's really one of the first programs that really linked those two together.
So, Mr. Elliott DeAngelis had mentioned a strategic leadership team. Which was that? Were you in the room by chance?
I wasn't in the room at that time, although I did talk to a colleague from Springfield yesterday.
Okay.
And I think what their interest was is the Oregon Safe Routes to School Network. So
Yes.
that's, I think that's the organization they were referring to.
Okay, so a different, and do you see a role for that consideration?
Yes, absolutely. So under the advocacy groups, that's one
They could
key
be- okay,
group that
very
we'd
good.
like to
Okay.
pull from.
One piece that I think is, as we talk about cities and counties, as they say, if you've seen one, you've seen one, that rural and urban piece. So as we have a lens through this, very different from even a Bend city to a Malala. How do we make sure that that's understood and embraced of what it looks like on the ground?
Right. I think that's an excellent point. And I think the lenses that we try to put on it are we want the diversity of members that represent policy perspectives and practitioner perspectives, just the same as we want urban perspectives, suburban, and rural perspectives. So I think that's a key component that we'll be looking for in appointing members.
And Madam Chair, if Lawton's mentioned about having a planner with some history and experience, it seems to me you capture that, if I heard you correctly, in that local jurisdiction opportunity. So I think covering whether it's a strategic leadership team embedded in that Safe Routes to School network, it sounds as if there's opportunity to address, and you may want to just talk to the good-looking fellow behind you there, help target some individuals that'll advance the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you.
So you've listed 13 different representations here. Does that mean you're going to have 13 members, or is that not yet decided?
I think that's to be determined, Commissioner Lohman. I think like on our statewide plan committees, sometimes we find members that cross multiple perspectives on this list.
Good. I think that's important that you have that flexibility and that we don't tie you down to that, to 13.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I also, well, you're not done. The other issue that Mr. DeAngelis raised was I think he was referring to the program design parameters, where the proposal is 50% to go to ODOT and 50% to go to a competitive process. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, where he would say make it all competitive, I think.
Sure, and if it's okay with you, I could get to that in just a couple slides.
Yeah, sure, okay.
Great.
Didn't mean to.
Okay. So I think then the next step, once you approve starting a rulemaking process and the membership of that committee, we want to make sure that we have a well laid out process. So we're going over the charge with you, and that's in the cover letter as well. So from a scope perspective, really focusing in on just the Oregon administrative rule that's mentioned, looking for ways to streamline that rule, but also make sure that it is adaptable. I think that's a really important component as we move forward, because we're going to learn as we go along on what works well, what doesn't. As we hopefully complete some needs, we'll move on to the next set. And so I think making that rule adaptable is a really key component. Also having the committee just consider objectives and priorities for that fund, whether that's equity, safety, some of the other goal areas, eligibility, project selection processes and criteria, and some of just the overall program parameters. As for schedule, we're trying to be pretty aggressive in getting the rulemaking done so that then we can have a call for proposals and get money out as fast as we can to those areas in need. So our plan is to then meet several times with the committee, come back to you with a draft rule by spring of 2018. In terms of what I'm calling the term of the committee, that committee will then be resolved once the rule is finalized. However, that we may want to use those same members or some of them for a Safe Routes to School advisory committee to continue to guide us on that process and to help select projects to be recommended to you as a commission. So then getting to the question that Commissioner Lohman raised, I think the other key component of the charge is what is the program design? And so unlike a lot of other funding allocations where the funding is first split 50% to ODOT, 30% to counties, 20% to cities, this funding was identified off the top of that allocation. In initial conversations with the Legislative Subcommittee on Needs, we had talked about a 50-50 split. Those conversations were not necessarily widespread, and they certainly weren't solidified in the bill language. So there's opportunity on what that program design looks like. Staff's recommendation is a part competitive program where 50% would be dedicated to counties and cities. That would be guided then by Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. The remaining 50% would go to ODOT, where we'd assure a consistent process with what the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee identifies and same priorities, and try to be very transparent. Some of the reasons that we're recommending the split are the state facilities tend to be some of the most unsafe, potentially, facilities. So from the All Roads Transportation Safety Program that identifies risk factors for biking and walking, our state highways have higher speeds, higher volumes, more lanes, and those are some of the highest risk facilities. So that's part of the reason that we're looking at that carve out. In addition, because of the match requirements, then we could have more flexibility in making sure that we match all projects in the state highway system, including through local communities. that we can also focus in communities that might be smaller, may not have the staff capacity to put together applications for safe routes to school. And in those communities, often it is the state highway that they're using to get to the school facility. And then there's opportunity for leveraging and reduced administrative costs. So those are some of the reasons from a staff perspective of why we're recommending that split.
But couldn't this be a conversation that the committee has and makes a recommendation back to the OTC in terms of looking at the need, looking at the research and the data that you just mentioned? And actually, it could end up that it's a 30% or a 42%. Is it a fair statement that that's a discussion that could actually happen within this committee and they recommend to us what they think that split should be?
Sure, I think there's
Okay.
opportunities either way. Now, if you want to set direction at the outset that then helps the committee, because of the tight timeline, kind of
Right.
narrow in on the program design, that's one option. The other option is to leave something like this open to them. And if you want to have some thoughts today that you'd like to share with that committee, we can share that with them, and they can come back with a stronger recommendation rather than setting that today. So those are options.
I think I'm hesitant to go to 50 and just call it at that without an understanding, I think, from that group as to why that would make sense. Again, it could be 35, it could be 55. I would just really be hesitant to say that out of the gate it's 50% period and then go from there. That's,
Madam Chair, we're not voting on that decision. We're just gonna, today, all you need from us is approval to begin the rulemaking process. So we will have an opportunity to weigh in, correct?
well, this would give direction to the committee as to what their scope would be. And do we want their scope to be beyond the threshold of 50%? Was my understanding. Is that?
Correct. So I think what we were doing today is offering the opportunity, if you'd like to provide that guidance sooner rather than later,
Okay.
to help guide the committee. But if that's something you'd like to defer till a later time, that's certainly an option as well.
I think we can.
I just think, look, it's well thought through. Let's just get the process started, the
Okay.
rulemaking process. And so accordingly, I'd request approval of the rulemaking process to amend Oregon Administrative Rule 737-025 to implement safe routes to school and to approve the proposed membership structure of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee.
Okay. Further discussion, which I think we have some. Go ahead.
Just very quickly, and I think, back, you're part competitive, all in, you determine percentages. I would also, we've gotten a couple of letters, and the one that intrigued me was from the Street Trust. Not that the other one didn't intrigue me, but it was support, and I agree. I'm all in on safe routes to schools. The 2 points on the Street Trust letter is let's really focus on the differences between small cities and larger cities, and also addressing students of all ages. I found this intriguing, and looking at my own community and things we are suggesting. High school kids won't get out of their cars if they don't have to, but if we don't have safe routes to school for all school age groups, they'll never get out of their car. So I think providing that opportunity, not just K through 6, where we've been focused, and I totally agree with that also, but perhaps not forgetting the other school age groups. So I just wanted to bring up those letters and appreciate that the letters that we get, and I know you would do that as well. Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely, I concur. Commissioner Simpson also has a comment, but if you want to respond to Commissioner Brown or Commissioner.
Sure, no, I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Brown, and just one note is the legislation is specific that the commission has to prioritize projects to elementary and middle schools, but it doesn't restrict only to those, so I think fair point.
Excellent, please.
Okay, just real fast, just a clarifying here, that it indicates that this safe routes to school, that these funds these prioritized projects have to be within 1 mile of the elementary, middle schools, and obviously now we're talking high schools potentially, but does that mean that the project completely is within a 1 mile radius, or can a project start within that 1 mile radius and go beyond that radius?
Commissioner Simpson, I think that's a good question that the committee will need to determine. I think my personal read on it would be the funding for infrastructure has to be within that 1 mile radius, although it it puts priority towards 1 mile, and it says near school, so there could be some flexibility there. So I think that is something the committee can help to work out, is making sure those definitions are clear.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's clear that this is intended for the youth in order to get to school safely, and not for any other potential usages. Not to say that there's anything against that, but it's just, I don't want it to be manipulated in that way.
Thank you.
I want to be sure I understand the motion that we're about to vote on, or at least your understanding of the motion. I'm not entirely clear with respect to what Commissioner O'Halloran was saying. If we vote yes on his motion, does that mean we are using the 50% split, or does it mean we are leaving that open for discussion and decision and recommendation from the Rule Advisory Committee?
Sure, good question, Commissioner Lowen. So the only formal action that we're requesting of the commission is the formation of a rules-making advisory committee and starting the rulemaking process. Beyond that, we also want to be transparent with you on what we think our process is for that rulemaking advisory committee, and if you had any advice that you wanted to give or strongly suggest to the committee at this point, that was the opportunity to do that as well.
Okay, so it's still open is the way I would interpret it. Okay.
It is, my concern would be we start a committee with an understanding of a certain criteria, or that their scope of work is within a certain box. And I want to open that a little bit so that we have a rich dialogue out of the gate on this particular topic. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Does everyone understand the motion? Okay, do we have any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. More to come. Thank you very much. All right, and we will be abbreviating lunch just a tad. Director Garrett, we'll be abbreviating lunch just a tad so that we can stay on track. All righty, so let's go forward now with item H, which is request approval to begin the rulemaking process for the implementation of the for Section 122, approval of the proposed structure for another rules-making committee. Hal Gard, please, the floor is yours.
There we go. Chair Boehne, members of the commission, I'm Hal Gard. I'm the administrator of the Rail and Public Transit Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Hopefully, I can make up a little bit of time. This is a very similar request. We're here to request to begin rulemaking process for the implementation of the brand new statewide Transportation Improvement Fund that was established under House Bill 2017, and including approval of the charge and proposed membership structure of the Rules Advisory Committee. Slightly different than Amanda's presentation, these are brand new rules, because these are brand new programs that we are creating out of whole cloth. And that's one of the reasons why we've, even though we're under quite a bit of a time crunch, we did not opt for a temporary rules process to get people going out the gate, because we need to have that extensive stakeholder engagement and input from the actual recipients of the funds. Section 22 of the House bill provides statewide funding for transportation service, with monies coming from a newly established employee tax of 0.1% on wages. Proceeds from the tax will be deposited within the statewide improvement fund. And the Oregon Department of Revenue will begin collecting those funds in July of 2018, and the first disbursement of those funds is scheduled for January 1, 2019. The funds are allocated in the following percentages by the law. 90% by formula to qualified entities. That includes those counties that do not contain a transportation district or a mass transit district. Mass transit districts, transportation districts, and Indian tribes are the qualified Indian entities for the funds. 5% is to go to qualified entities on a discretionary basis, so an application-based competitive process. 4% to transportation service providers to improve intercity service, and this is really not quite intercity as we tend to think of it. It's intercity. It's achieving connections between service providers. So it may not be an actually intercity, but it may be moving people from Forest Grove to Portland using existing facilities through cooperative agreements, that type of thing. The final 1% comes to ODOT to establish a new statewide public transportation technical resource center to assist rural providers with training, planning, information technology, and the like. The first grant agreements for distribution of the formula funds are to be executed January 1, 2019, as I stated. The grant agreements for the 2 discretionary programs are to be executed by July 1, 2019. Our intent is to work through a rural advisory committee as well as collecting stakeholder input and service provider input, develop rules that we would bring back to this commission for final approval. Basically, there are some key elements that we need to establish through rule. Law requires that to be an eligible recipient, you have to provide a transportation or a public transportation improvement plan. So we really need to work on what are the processes for reviewing and approving each qualified entity's public improvement plan. We need to work on the contents of those particular plans, and those plans need to address how the funds are going to be used to achieve one of a series of requirements that are outlined in the law. It's to increase service frequency, to expand routes and reduce fares for low-income households, procure buses powered by natural gas or electricity use in areas with populations over 200,000, improve frequency and reliability of service connections within and outside of a qualified entity service area. That's kind of that, again, that intercity piece that they're talking about, and coordinate between public transportation service providers to reduce fragmentation of services. Plan also requires that local advisory committees be established, and those local advisory committees are responsible for reviewing and approving plans for submittal to the OTC for final adoption. The rules need to specify the requirements for the local advisory committee composition. There needs to be criteria of what must be included in the plans or the project proposals that are reviewed by those new advisory committees, and a process by which the advisory committee shall review each plan or project proposal. Another broad category is reporting and transparency requirements. Summary of the 90% formula plans and projects approved by local advisory committees, how that year's distribution or allocation is actually going to be used. We have additional qualified entity fiscal reporting requirements as part of the accountability components of the rule. There needs to be an adopted annual budget and process for approval of those, and how we incorporate the results of any audits are all pieces of it. For the discretionary and intercity discretionary programs, we really need rules in terms of how that 5% fund, the competitive grant process needs to work, and the timing of it. And for the 4% for the competitive grant program for the improved services, we need to completely work through those processes. Those are the pieces that are in the law. There are a couple of additional pieces that we would like to include into rule, and I am looking for a little feedback from the commission on these elements. It's very important to us that we're able to incorporate these new programs into our existing programs as much as possible in an efficient fashion. So we'd really like to find a way, to the extent that we can time grant process allocations with our current grant award process, so that we're not in a continuous grant cycle. We can actually kind of push them all out at once and know when they're coming and get the timing down. We need to make sure that there's equitable fund distribution around the state, so that we don't have continuous winners and losers, knowing that we're going to have different allocations based upon the size of service districts. But you know, costs are greater in rural areas for a lower return, but we need to make sure that we're addressing those adequately. We need to make sure that we're continuing to fund strategic investment, and what we really like is reporting back on how the additional state funds are being used to leverage federal funds. It's not a component of the law, but it's a question we always get, and we figure if we can incorporate that into rule, we can get a much better handle terms of how we're allocating both federal and local public investments around the state funds. Collaboration and coordination, we really want to continue to encourage collaboration between service providers, and we see that that's probably one of the most efficient ways that we're going to get highest return on investments is through those cooperative relationships between service providers. And there's some areas that do that quite well, and there's some areas that do not. So having a little force of rule can help us encourage that a little bit more. And then again, we really want to be able to incorporate every bit of both service provider and public stakeholder input into the process as we can. The membership, really we're just asking for approval of broad categories. Of course, we want representatives of large urban, small urban, rural, tribal, and non-government transit providers. We're looking for representation from counties and cities. We're looking for bicycle and pedestrian advocates. We're looking for environmental advocacy groups, the business community, seniors and individuals with disabilities, equity, social justice, and environmental justice advocates, social and human service agencies, and finally transit users. We're looking at no more than 20 people to serve on this Rules Advisory Committee. Just as in Amanda's presentation, we're really not looking for names. We're just looking for, are those the right categories? Did we hit them? And with that.
Excellent. That was a good flyover. Is public health captured under social and human services?
That's the intent.
Agents?
That's the
Okay.
intent.
Okay.
And I would say public health transportation services, not overall, Department of Human
Right.
Services type.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Very good. Please.
I think I mentioned this before in regards to the value pricing, but there really is no distinction between environmental justice and environmental advocacy groups. So again, it's redundant content where it doesn't make sense to me by having two of the same things broken out in two different line items. So we might as well just condense it to environmental advocacy and justice groups, and leaving equity as itself, and potentially even incorporate diversity with equity on that line item. I don't feel like the overlap makes much sense, because it's just going to potentially put two representatives from the environmental category and could potentially remove an individual that could be a strong advocate and voice as it relates to equity and diversity.
Just, Commissioner Simpson, just for my clarity, when I'm thinking environmental advocacy group, I immediately go to places like Thousand Friends, folks that may have climate change interests. When I think about environmental justice groups, I think about folks who are representing farm labor organizations, or folks who are focused on economically disadvantaged groups or minority groups. So I'm not sure, at least our intent was to make sure that we had representatives from both of those perspectives.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of those groups, I mean, if we're looking at equity stakeholders, a lot of those folks are gonna have backgrounds in that either way. I just don't want it to be blended in environmentally, because equity is pretty broad. I mean, just to pretty much be direct about it. But for the most part, environmental organizations typically, at least in today's standards, are advocating from a broad array of perspective as it relates to the environment.
Okay, thank you. Point well taken.
On that point, I took that third to last bullet, the equity and environmental justice advocates, to be talking about folks who are concerned about impacts or benefits for people, and the environmental advocacy groups really are not so much focused on people as they are on, I don't know what geography, on the environment as opposed to human beings. And I think there is a distinction there that makes kind of both those groups valuable to have on this advisory committee. I'm hoping, well, we've got the Policy Advisory Committee on Public Transportation going right now. We've got 15 or so people spending a lot of time over a 2-year period So I don't know how much more time they would have to put into this, but I'm hoping that you would consider somehow fitting in there somebody who's on that policy advisory committee, because we've been through so much discussion about the statewide needs for public transportation.
And Commissioner Lemon, that's highly likely. I also see, and this is long-term down the road, but since we have a standing public transit advisory committee, I see a large role for them in helping review and vet plans and formula for recommendations to this body for those final decisions, since that is that standing group. The idea of standing up this, we will have, I'm certain, because it's not that big a world, we'll have somebody who sits on PTAC who's going to be sitting on this advisory committee. But I do want to make sure we're getting the other points of view as well to help inform the final rule development.
Commissioner Lohman, I don't want to steal your thunder, because I'm sure he would have said this too. Well, I can't say that. You always argue with me. So one of the things that I'd like us to look at with transit, and maybe, again, I'm a little naive, but there's a non-traditional way of looking at transit. And perhaps we should make sure that we really look at the potential for the non-traditional. And by that, I mean smaller type of vehicles, alternate fuel vehicles, which you've already mentioned, but that linkage to new ways of getting people around and moving people around. Traditional bus definitely has its place, but some of those new non-traditional means of connections to get people the last 2 miles. The last mile you ought to be able to walk, but those last 2 miles or 3 miles within communities, is there a way for that to be included in some of these transit options?
Absolutely, and Commissioner Brown, thank you for that. One of the great things about getting to live in Oregon is that we are a state of many different sizes and types, and what works in Portland certainly will not work in La Pine. And I think we're going to have abundant opportunity to explore every permutation of moving people in the way that they need to be moved to the places they need to go, given the circumstances of the location. So that I have no doubt that will be part of this process.
Thanks, Hal.
Commissioner Brown?
Oh, wow, okay, yes. Well, the minutes will reflect that the two of you agree. Note that we did not seat you together, so could be by design or just by chance. Thank you. So, please, go right ahead.
I'm just curious, because I didn't hear confirmation whether or not diversity is not a priority for the department. Because I want to make sure that this is highlighted in here as part of this dialogue, especially as it relates to metropolitan regions, as they have transit issues related to those particular populations that depend heavily on this. And it's something that I believe it should be part of this dialogue, and there should be representation part of that particular community.
Commissioner, I could not agree more. And that is part and parcel of the service that all those key service providers provide. And if it's not overtly stated, we will make sure it is overtly stated in rule.
Great.
No challenge to the.
Well, and if I may, I mean, just to put a finer point on it, again, it comes down to definitions, and there's been just discussion about environmental advocacy groups versus environmental justice group. But again, the way we define this, and I wrote this down, is environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, all encompassing, ensuring that we have all voices, all perspectives that will come to the table here. So that is, we will be explicit in terms of the way we define environmental justice, social justice, as we move forward there. So again, I think I will show you that intentionality, and we'll put that definition into the conversation as we speak now and into the future.
Absolutely.
This investment of funding is a game changer for many communities. And with that comes a significant responsibility and potentially a different business model in some communities than may exist today. So within this, I feel that we have a responsibility to make sure that there's financial viability for some of the organizations in which we'll be partnering with. And I don't know how you call that out in a way that we need to strengthen that network, because we're moving beyond true bake sales and blending of funds to really true accountability and
Yes.
reporting and transparency, of which we all gain or we all lose if that does or does not work.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we put that thread in here, but I want to make sure that it is, I very much appreciate that there is, it's, the business community is part of, because we have to be accountable to the public about the return on the investment. And the organizations in which we partnered with will need to be very lean and mean in order to expand services to meet that.
The accountability components are called out very loudly in law. We take them very, very seriously because we're called to account.
You bet.
Every single year, and we have continued to put robust oversight components in our administration of federal funds. We expect to have the same robust oversight responsibilities with our administration of state funds. The exciting part for me is that 1% Technical Resource Center component, which actually gives us some capacity to work very, very closely and provide resources to some of those smaller providers, particularly around what are the elements of actually running an effective and efficient public transportation service. And I think that does allow us to get away from bake sales, and I think it does allow us to help those groups put in place the business responsibilities that they need to have in order to continue to not just provide, but to grow public transportation in the state. So that's the piece that I'm encouraged about. We're intentionally leaving that out of rule because we see it shifting over time as people's capacities and needs change. So we just figure that gives us the elasticity and ability to move as we need to, whereas the money piece actually requires a great deal more structure.
Well, it won't be the last time I bring it up, but I just want to make sure that
Appreciate
it's out there. Thank you. Please.
Pile on that a little bit, it's at least slightly related. And it is a nit, I apologize, but in the investment strategy that you had where we discussed transit, you had a pie graph that showed statewide how public transportation is funded. You know, a certain amount from fares, certain amount from federal government. And that was really helpful in some of my discussions with folks, because many people who aren't in this world will say, well, why doesn't fares cover it all? And realizing that we're so far from that, and that everybody, not just Oregon, is so far from that, that if that's what we insisted on, we wouldn't have public transportation. But as you were talking about reporting back and the accountability that these jurisdictions would have, that kind of pie chart that shows where their money comes from, I think would be a good discipline for them and a good communication tool to use as we develop this program.
Commissioner, I agree. I
Not
agree.
part of the rules, I don't think, but.
No, but I think it's good to always keep in mind where the money comes from and how we're being able to account for who's paying for what. Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. Further questions? I would welcome a motion.
All right, so that we can go have lunch, I request the approval to begin the rulemaking process for implementation of the statewide Transportation Improvement Fund created in House Bill 2017, Section 122, including approval of proposed membership structure for the Rules Advisory Committee.
Excellent. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are recessed until 1:30.